The morning Marla Vance decided to stop apologizing for taking up space, the sky over Bridger's Crossing was the color of old bruises, purple-gray and threatening rain that wouldn't come. Just pressure, just wait. The kind of morning that made bones ache and tempers short. She stood in the yard behind Sullivan's boarding house, her hands deep in a basin of cold water, scrubbing potatoes that someone else would eat. The water was ice cold despite it being late spring, and her knuckles were already raw. Behind her, through the warped window frame, she could hear Mrs. Sullivan's voice cutting through the kitchen. "And I don't care what she thinks is fair, Martha. The woman eats more than she earns. You've seen the size of her." Marla didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Hell, she'd heard that exact sentence at least a dozen times in the past month alone. What struck her wasn't the cruelty. It was the boredom in Mrs. Sullivan's voice. Like commenting on the weather, like stating a fact. Martha's response was quieter, apologetic. "She works hard though, Agnes, harder than most." Work doesn't change what the eyes see. Marla lifted another potato from the bucket, feeling its weight, its cold density. She didn't look toward the window, didn't give them the satisfaction, but something in her chest tightened. Not hurt, exactly, more like recognition, like finally hearing someone say out loud what you'd always known they thought. She'd been working at Sullivan's for 8 months. 8 months of 14-hour days, of hauling water and chopping wood and cooking meals for 30 strangers who never looked at her directly. 8 months of sleeping in the storage room off the kitchen because there wasn't space in the women's quarters. 8 months of being paid half what the other cooks made because Mrs. Sullivan said her condition required accommodation. The condition being that Marla was fat, not plump, not heavy set, not any of the polite words people used when they wanted to pretend they weren't talking about your body. Fat. Nearly 300 pounds of flesh and bone and muscle earned through years of hard labor and harder hunger. The kind of body that made people assume laziness, gluttony, moral failure. The kind of body that turned you invisible in some ways and hypervisible in others. Marla had stopped trying to explain that she'd been heavy since childhood, that her mother had been the same, that no amount of deprivation changed it. She'd tried that years ago, nearly starved herself to death one winter, and lost maybe 20 pounds before her body simply stopped cooperating. She'd learned that people didn't want explanations. They wanted confirmation of what they already believed. So she worked, and she kept her mouth shut. Until today. But she didn't know that yet. The potato in her hand was misshapen, one side bulging like it had tried to grow around a rock. She set it aside with the others, her fingers moving automatically through the work. Behind her, Mrs. Sullivan's voice had moved on to other complaints. The cost of flour, the unreliability of the supply wagons, the rumors that the railroad survey crew would be coming through within the month. That last part made Marla's hands still. The railroad. For the past 6 weeks, it was all anyone talked about. The Union Pacific was finally pushing west through the territory, surveying routes, planning the line that would connect the coast to the rest of the country. And wherever the railroad went, money followed, contracts, opportunity. The kind of work that could change everything. The kind of work that could set someone free. Marla had been listening to the gossip with the same careful attention she gave to everything, filing it away, not letting herself hope, but not dismissing it either. Because hope was dangerous, but so was resignation. She finished the potatoes and moved on to the onions, her eyes starting to water almost immediately. She didn't wipe them. Just let the tears run down her face like they belonged there. "Marla!" Mrs. Sullivan's voice, sharp as a whip crack. Marla turned, still holding the half-peeled onion. Mrs. Sullivan stood in the doorway, her thin frame backlit by the kitchen's warmth, her expression somewhere between annoyance and calculation. "When you're done with those, I need you to start on the bread. We're expecting guests tonight." "Yes, ma'am." "And Marla?" Mrs. Sullivan's eyes traveled down, then back up. "Try to keep yourself presentable. First impressions matter." Something in Marla's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Sullivan lingered for another moment, like she wanted to say something else, then disappeared back into the kitchen. The door swung shut behind her with a soft thud. Marla went back to the onions. Her hands moved steadily, methodically. Peel, chop, scrape into the bowl. Peel, chop, scrape. The rhythm was meditative, almost. A way to empty her mind of everything except the immediate task. But today it wasn't working. Today, something felt different. Maybe it was the mention of the railroad. Maybe it was the casual cruelty in Mrs. Sullivan's voice. Maybe it was just the accumulation of 8 months. No, not 8 months. 28 years. 28 years of being told in 1,000 different ways that she took up too much space. She set down the knife and pressed her palms flat against the table, feeling the rough wood beneath her skin. Her mother used to say that anger was a luxury poor people couldn't afford, that survival required swallowing your pride, bending your neck, accepting whatever scraps the world offered, and calling yourself grateful. Her mother had died at 43, worn down to nothing, still apologizing for breathing. Marla looked at her hands, broad, scarred, strong, capable hands. Hands that could turn a pile of scraps into a meal that made grown men weep. Hands that had never been idle, never been soft, never been anything but useful. And yet. "You still out here?" The voice startled her. She turned to find Henry Garver leaning against the corner of the building, his arms crossed, a half smile on his weathered face. Henry was one of the few people at Sullivan's who treated her like a person, probably because he was old enough not to give a damn what anyone thought and broke enough not to pretend otherwise. "Just finishing up," Marla said. "Mrs. Sullivan's got her knickers in a twist about something." "When doesn't she?" Henry's smile widened. "Fair point." He pushed off from the wall and walked over, glancing into the basin. "Heard anything more about the railroad contract?" So he'd been listening too. "Just rumors," Marla said carefully. "Rumors have a way of being true out here." He paused, studying her face. "You thinking about it?" She didn't answer right away. The truth was too big, too dangerous to say out loud. That yes, she'd been thinking about it constantly. That she'd been calculating odds and costs and possibilities. That she'd been imagining what it might feel like to work for herself, to answer to no one, to cook without someone standing over her shoulder telling her she wasn't worth what she produced. "Everyone's thinking about it," she said finally, "but you could actually do it." Henry's voice was quiet, serious. "I've tasted your cooking, Marla. Hell, everyone here has. You're better than anyone I've ever met, and I've been eating trail food for 30 years. The compliment landed somewhere in her chest, warm and uncomfortable. "Being good doesn't matter if no one's willing to hire you," she said. "Then make them willing." She looked at him sharply. "How?" "The rendezvous?" He gestured vaguely toward the mountains. 3 weeks from now. Big gathering, traders, trappers, railroad men. They're holding a competition. Winner gets the contract to feed the survey crew for the next 6 months. Marla had heard about the rendezvous, of course. Everyone had. It was an annual tradition, a massive gathering in the high country where deals were made and reputations earned or destroyed. But she'd never seriously considered attending. "I can't enter that," she said. "Why not?" "Because—" She stopped, hating how her voice sounded. Uncertain, small. "Because they won't let me." "Says who?" "Says everyone. You know how it is, Henry. A woman enters a competition like that, she better be—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Better be what? Thin? Proper? Respectable?" Henry's expression hardened. "You're twice the cook any of those bastards will ever be. You enter, you'll win. And if I don't, then you're exactly where you are now, working yourself to death for pennies while Agnes Sullivan gets fat off your labor." He leaned in closer. "You got nothing to lose, girl. Nothing." He was wrong about that. She had something to lose. She had the ability to keep her head down, to stay invisible, to survive without drawing attention. Entering the rendezvous would be like painting a target on her back, but it would also be a chance, maybe the only chance. "I'll think about it," she said. Henry nodded, then turned to go. He paused at the corner of the building, looking back. "You know what your problem is, Marla? I'm sure you'll tell me. You think you have to earn the right to exist. You don't. You just exist. And anyone who's got a problem with that can go straight to hell." He disappeared around the corner before she could respond. Marla stood there in the cooling afternoon, her hands still damp, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. The onions sat half-peeled in the basin. The sky overhead had darkened further, the pressure building towards something that felt inevitable. She picked up the knife again, started peeling, but her mind was already somewhere else, up in the high country, standing in front of a crowd that didn't want her there, proving something she'd been told her entire life was impossible. The guests arrived that evening just as the last light was bleeding out of the sky. Marla heard them before she saw them. The sound of horses, the low rumble of men's voices, the particular kind of laughter that came from people who'd been traveling together too long. She was in the kitchen, elbow deep in bread dough, when Mrs. Sullivan burst through the door with an expression that meant trouble. "They're here. Railroad men. Clean yourself up and bring out the first course in 10 minutes. Marla looked down at herself. Her apron was covered in flour, her sleeves rolled up past her elbows, her hair escaping from its braid. There was no version of cleaning herself up that would satisfy whatever image Mrs. Sullivan had in her head. "Yes, ma'am," she said anyway. She finished shaping the loaves and slid them into the oven, then moved to the basin to wash her hands and face. The water was cold, the soap harsh. She scrubbed until her skin felt raw, then smoothed her hair back as best she could and retied her apron. It wouldn't matter, it never did, but the ritual of trying felt necessary somehow. The first course was a simple beef stew with root vegetables. Nothing fancy, but it was good. Better than good. Marla had a talent for taking cheap ingredients and turning them into something that made people pause mid-conversation. It wasn't magic, it was just attention, just care, just the knowledge that food could be more than fuel if you let it. She ladled the stew into bowls and arranged them on a tray, then pushed through the door into the dining room. The table was full, 8 men, all of them dusty from the trail, all of them talking over each other with the easy confidence of people who'd never been told to lower their voices. Mrs. Sullivan stood near the head of the table, playing hostess, her smile bright and false. Marla moved silently around the table, setting down bowls, not making eye contact. This was the safest way. Be invisible, be efficient, be gone before anyone noticed you were there. She was almost done when one of the men, middle-aged, with a thick beard and small calculating eyes, looked up at her. "Well," he said, loud enough that everyone else stopped talking, "ain't you a big girl?" The room went still. Marla's hands froze on the last bowl. She could feel everyone looking at her, the weight of their attention like a physical thing pressing down on her shoulders. "That's Marla," Mrs. Sullivan said quickly, her voice bright with false cheer. "She's our cook, best in the territory." "I bet she is," the man said, and the way he said it made something in Marla's stomach turn over. "Probably samples a lot of her own cooking, eh?" A few of the other men laughed. Not all of them. A couple looked uncomfortable, looked away. But enough. Enough that the laughter filled the room like smoke. Marla set down the last bowl, straightened, looked the man directly in his small, mean eyes. "If my size offends you," she said, her voice low and clear, "then don't eat my food." The laughter died. The man's expression shifted, surprise first, then something uglier. He opened his mouth, probably to say something worse, but Mrs. Sullivan jumped in. "Marla, that's enough. Go back to the kitchen." "Actually," another voice said, and everyone turned. The man who'd spoken was sitting at the far end of the table. He was older than the others, maybe 50, with iron gray hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades in hard country. He hadn't laughed, hadn't even smiled. "I'd like to hear more about her cooking," he said, looking directly at Marla. "What makes it the best in the territory?" It was a challenge disguised as a question. Marla could feel it, the test beneath the words. "I don't waste anything," she said, "and I don't serve anything I wouldn't eat myself." Simple philosophy. Effective one. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "What's your name?" "Marla Vance." "Rourke Maddox." He gestured to the bowl in front of him. "This your work?" "Yes, sir." He picked up his spoon, dipped it into the stew, tasted. The room watched him like he was delivering a verdict. When he swallowed, his expression didn't change. "It's good," he said simply. Not praise, exactly, just acknowledgement. But coming from him, it felt like more. The bearded man who'd made the initial comment looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. "Well, Rourke, you always did have peculiar tastes." "I have standards," Rourke corrected, not looking at him. His eyes were still on Marla. "You entering the rendezvous competition?" The question caught her off guard. "I haven't decided." "You should." He took another spoonful of stew. "This is the kind of cooking that could win it." Mrs. Sullivan made a small, startled sound. "The rendezvous? But that's..." Open to anyone who can cook, Rourke said flatly. That's the rule. Has been for 20 years. Yes, but Mrs. Sullivan's face had gone pink. I mean, traditionally. Tradition's another word for cowardice. Rourke set down his spoon and looked around the table. Anyone here got a problem with skill being the only thing that matters? No one answered. The bearded man looked mutinous but kept his mouth shut. Rourke turned back to Marla. You got until sunset 3 weeks from Sunday to register. Entry fee is $5. Winner gets 6 months feeding a crew of 40 men. That's gold enough to set yourself up proper. $5 might as well have been $500. Marla had maybe $2 saved, and that had taken her 8 months to hide away. I'll think about it, she said. Don't think too long. He went back to his stew. Opportunity doesn't wait. Mrs. Sullivan was practically vibrating with suppressed outrage, but she couldn't say anything with Rourke sitting right there. Marla took the opportunity to retreat to the kitchen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Behind her, the conversation slowly resumed, but she could still feel the weight of what had just happened. Rourke Maddox had just defended her in front of a room full of men. Rourke Maddox, who according to the stories was harder than January frost and about as warm. Rourke Maddox, who judged the rendezvous competition every year and had never given a single compliment in his life. He'd called her cooking good, and he'd told her to enter. Marla leaned against the kitchen table, her hands shaking slightly. This wasn't hope. She knew better than to let herself feel hope. But it was something. A crack in the wall. A possibility. She had 3 weeks. 3 weeks to find $5. 3 weeks to figure out if she was brave enough or desperate enough to step into a contest that would put her in front of everyone who'd ever told her she didn't belong. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm that had been threatening all day finally decided to break. Rain began to fall, hard and cold, drumming against the roof. Marla closed her eyes and listened to it. Then she started planning. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of doubled work and careful calculations. Marla took on every extra job she could find, mending clothes, hauling water, scrubbing floors for the other boarding houses in town. She worked through the night sometimes, sleeping in stolen hours, moving through exhaustion like it was just another obstacle to push past. Mrs. Sullivan noticed, of course, made comments about Marla being distracted and less focused. But she didn't stop her, probably because the extra work meant Marla was even more useful than before. Henry helped where he could, slipped her coins when no one was looking, told her about odd jobs that paid in cash instead of credit, reminded her when she was ready to give up why she was doing this. Because you're the best damn cook in this territory, he said one night when she was so tired she could barely stand. And it's time people knew it. By the 3rd week, she had $4.60, close enough that she could taste it, far enough that it felt impossible. Then something happened that changed everything. She was cleaning the dining room late one evening when she overheard a conversation through the partially open door to the parlor. 2 voices, one she recognized as a local merchant, the other unfamiliar but educated, precise. The real money isn't in the contract itself, the merchant was saying. It's in the supply lines. Whoever feeds the crew controls what gets bought and where. You position yourself right, you can make triple what the railroad's paying. And the competition? Fixed. Eleanor Pierce has it locked down. Her family's got connections all the way to the territory governor. This whole rendezvous thing is just theater. The winner's already decided. Marla's hand stilled on the table she was wiping. Eleanor Pierce. She'd heard the name. Everyone had. The Pierce family owned half the mercantile operations in the territory. Eleanor herself ran a high-end catering business that served the wealthy families in Cheyenne. She was everything Marla wasn't. Refined, connected, backed by money and influence. And according to this conversation, she'd already won. Marla should have felt defeated. Should have recognized it as confirmation of what she'd always suspected, that the system was rigged, that people like her never really had a chance. Instead, she felt something else. Rage. Cold, clear, focusing rage. She finished cleaning, went back to her room, and pulled out the small cloth bag where she kept her savings. $4.60. Not enough. But maybe enough didn't matter anymore. Maybe just showing up was enough. She thought about her mother, worn down by years of swallowing her anger, accepting injustice because fighting it seemed impossible. She thought about Mrs. Sullivan's casual cruelty, about the bearded man's laughter, about every single person who'd ever looked at her like she was something to be managed or dismissed. She thought about Rourke Maddox saying, "You should," not "you could," not "maybe," just "you should," like it was obvious, like it was already decided. The next morning, Marla went to Mrs. Sullivan and quit. The older woman's face went through several colors before settling on outraged red. "You ungrateful. After everything I've done for you. You've paid me half wages for 8 months and made me sleep in a storage room," Marla said calmly. "I don't owe you gratitude. You'll never work in this town again. Good. I'm done working for people like you." She walked out with nothing but her knives, her savings, and the clothes on her back. Henry was waiting outside. He pressed something into her hand, $2 silver. "I can't," Marla started. "You can and you will. Go make me proud." She looked at the coins in her palm, $6.60 total. More than enough. "Henry, go," he said, smiling, "before I change my mind and bet it all on you instead." The journey to the rendezvous site took 2 days on foot. Marla had managed to hitch a ride on a supply wagon for part of it, but the last stretch was just her and the mountain trail, her pack heavy with her knives and what few supplies she could afford. She crested the final ridge just before sunset on the third Sunday, and the site below stopped her in her tracks. The valley was massive, easily a mile across, and it was filled with people. Tents and wagons spread out in a sprawling temporary city. Smoke rose from hundreds of cooking fires. The sound drifted up. Voices, laughter, music, the general chaos of several thousand people occupying the same space. And in the center of it all, a large open area marked off with rope and wooden posts. The competition ground. Marla's stomach twisted. This was real. This was actually happening. She made her way down the slope, her legs aching, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. A few people looked at her as she passed. Some curious, some dismissive, some openly hostile. She kept her head up and her expression neutral. The registration tent was near the competition ground. A line of people waited outside, mostly men, a few women, all of them looking more prepared than Marla felt. She joined the line, waited, tried not to think about what she was doing. When she reached the front, the man behind the table looked up, his expression professionally neutral. "Name?" "Marla Vance." He made a note. "Entry fee is $5. She counted out the coins carefully. The man swept them into a box without really looking at them, then pushed a piece of paper toward her. "You'll be assigned a cooking station tomorrow morning. Competition starts at noon. You've got 4 hours to prepare a full meal, main course, sides, bread. Judges will taste everything. Winner announced at sunset." "Who are the judges?" "Rourke Maddox, Samuel Gray, and Catherine Thornwood. Any questions?" "About 1,000. But Marla just shook her head. "Good. Next." She stepped aside, clutching the registration paper like it might disappear if she let go. Around her, the activity of the rendezvous continued, deals being made, stories being told, the entire intricate web of frontier commerce and connection happening all at once. Marla found a quiet spot at the edge of the grounds and set up her bedroll. She didn't have a tent, didn't have much of anything really, but she had her knives. And she had a plan, sort of. She tried to sleep but couldn't. The ground was hard, the night cold, and her mind wouldn't stop spinning through possibilities and disasters. Every sound made her think someone was coming to tell her there'd been a mistake, that she wasn't actually allowed to compete, that someone like her had no business being here. But no one came. And slowly, impossibly, the night passed. When dawn broke, gray and cold, Marla was already awake. She rolled up her bedroll, checked her knives for the 100th time, and made her way to the competition ground. Other competitors were already there, claiming stations, unpacking equipment. Marla counted 15 people total. Most of them had helpers, assistants to fetch water, manage fires, handle the dozen small tasks that went into preparing a competition meal. Marla had herself. She found her assigned station, number 7, near the center, and started setting up. The cooking area was basic: a fire pit, a metal frame for hanging pots, a small work table. Everything else she'd have to manage herself. The morning passed in a haze of preparation. Marla worked steadily, blocking out everything except the immediate tasks. Get the fire going, set up her knives, plan the meal. She'd decided on what she knew best: frontier food elevated by technique and care. venison stew with wild herbs, cornbread with honey butter, roasted root vegetables. Simple components, but each one done exactly right. The crowd began gathering around mid-morning. Spectators, traders, people who'd come just to watch. Marla tried not to look at them, tried to focus on her work. Then she saw Eleanor Pierce. The woman was easy to spot. She stood at Station 3, surrounded by assistants, her cooking area looking more like a professional kitchen than a competition setup. She was younger than Marla expected, maybe 30, with honey brown hair pulled back in an elegant knot and a dress that probably cost more than Marla had earned in a year. She looked exactly like someone who belonged here. Marla looked down at her own stained apron, her rough hands, her scuffed boots. "Don't!" The voice startled her. She turned to find Henry standing there, slightly out of breath like he'd been running. "Don't what?" she asked. "Don't compare yourself. You're not competing against her clothes or her money. You're competing with food, and yours is better." "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do. So do you, if you're being honest." He squeezed her shoulder. "Cook like you always do, like it matters. That's all you need." He disappeared into the crowd before she could respond. Marla took a deep breath, then another. Then she got to work. 1. At noon exactly, a horn blew. The competition began. Marla moved through the initial stages like she was in a trance. Fire management first, getting the coals to the right temperature, setting up the different heat zones she'd need. Then prep work, cleaning and cutting the venison, preparing the vegetables, mixing the cornbread batter. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. This was the one place where her size was an advantage. She had the strength to work fast, to manage heavy pots, to keep going when exhaustion would slow someone smaller. Around her, the other competitors worked with varying degrees of confidence. Some looked nervous, uncertain. Others moved with professional smoothness. Eleanor Pierce's station was a model of organization, her assistants fetching things before she even asked, every movement choreographed and precise. Marla didn't have choreography. She had muscle memory and stubbornness. An hour in, the smell of cooking meat began to fill the air. The crowd pressed closer, watching, commenting. Marla could hear fragments of conversation. "The Pierce woman's got it locked." "Heard the fix was in before anyone even registered." "Who's the big one at Station 7? She blocked it out, focused on the stew. The venison was browning nicely, the rendered fat perfect for building flavor. She added onions, let them soften, then garlic and wild herbs she'd gathered on the trail. The smell that rose up made her mouth water. 2 hours in, she put the cornbread in to bake, using the simple Dutch oven method that never failed. The vegetables went into a separate pot, roasting slowly with a bit of honey and salt. 3 hours in, she started assembly. This was the critical phase. Everything coming together, timing synchronized, the final adjustments that turned good food into something memorable. She tasted as she went. Adjusted seasoning. Added a touch more honey to the vegetables, a bit more herbs to the stew. The cornbread came out golden and steaming, the smell of it making the crowd murmur with appreciation. 4 hours after they'd started, the horn blew again. Time was up. Marla stepped back from her station, her clothes soaked with sweat, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. On the table in front of her sat her meal, simple, honest, made with every ounce of skill she possessed. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. The judges began their rounds. Catherine Thornwood went first, a severe-looking woman in her 50s who owned a restaurant in Denver. She tasted each dish methodically, her expression giving nothing away. Samuel Gray followed, an old trapper who'd been attending the rendezvous for 40 years. He was more expressive, nodding or frowning based on what he tasted. And then came Rourke Maddox. He moved down the line of stations slowly, tasting each dish with the same careful attention. When he reached Eleanor Pierce's station, he spent a long time there. Marla couldn't hear what they were saying, but Eleanor looked confident, pleased. Then he turned to Marla's station. Their eyes met for just a moment. His expression was unreadable. He approached the table, looked at what she'd prepared, then picked up a spoon, tasted the stew. His eyes closed. The crowd went silent. Marla's heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of her chest. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except watch as Rourke Maddox, the man who never gave compliments, who was known for destroying reputations with a single word, stood there with his eyes closed, holding a spoonful of her stew like it was something precious. When he opened his eyes, he looked directly at her. "This isn't camp food," he said quietly. The words hung in the air. Then he set down the spoon, picked up a piece of cornbread, tasted it. Didn't speak. Moved to the vegetables. Tried those too. Finally, he stepped back. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked. Marla's voice came out rougher than she intended. "My mother's kitchen, boarding houses, mining camps, anywhere people were hungry. And you've been doing this how long?" "All my life." He nodded slowly. Then, without another word, he moved on to the next station. Marla stood there, not sure what had just happened. Around her, the crowd was buzzing with speculation. Had that been good? Bad? Was the silence approval or disappointment? The judges conferred for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Marla couldn't watch. She turned away, started cleaning her station, needing something to do with her hands. "Marla." She turned. Henry stood there, his eyes bright. "Whatever happens," he said, "you did it. You stood up. You didn't disappear." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Then the judges stepped forward. Rourke Maddox's voice carried across the competition ground. "We have a winner." The crowd pressed closer. Marla's hands gripped the edge of her work table so hard her knuckles went white. "The winner of this year's rendezvous cooking competition," a pause that seemed to stretch forever, "is Marla Vance." The world tilted. Marla heard the announcement, heard the crowd's reaction, some cheering, some shocked into silence, some openly hostile. She heard Eleanor Pierce's sharp intake of breath, heard someone nearby say, "That can't be right." But mostly she heard the blood rushing in her ears, loud as a river in flood. She'd won. She'd actually won. The cheering didn't last long enough to feel real. Marla stood there, her legs threatening to give out, while Rourke Maddox held up her hand like she'd just won a boxing match. The crowd's reaction was split down the middle. Half of them looked genuinely pleased, the other half looked like they'd just watched someone spit in church. Eleanor Pierce stood frozen at her station, her face the color of old paper. Her assistants hovered uncertainly around her, not sure whether to comfort their employer or start packing up. One of them, a young man with nervous hands, kept glancing between Eleanor and Marla like he was watching something he shouldn't see. "Speech!" someone in the crowd yelled. Marla's throat went dry. She hadn't prepared anything. Hadn't let herself imagine this moment because imagining it would have made losing worse. Rourke released her hand and stepped back, his expression still unreadable. "You don't have to say anything," he said quietly, just for her. "But it might help." "Help what?" Marla wanted to ask. Help make this crowd accept what just happened? Help convince herself it was real? She cleared her throat. The sound felt too loud. "I don't have a speech," she said, her voice carrying further than she expected. "I just came here to cook. That's all I know how to do." Someone in the back laughed, not unkindly, just surprised. And I guess she paused, looking out at all those faces. Some friendly, some hostile, most just curious. I guess that was enough. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't inspiring. But it was honest. And honesty was all she had left. The crowd dispersed slowly, breaking into smaller groups to discuss what they'd just witnessed. Marla caught fragments of conversation as people passed. "Never seen Rourke look like that." "Pierce is going to fight this, mark my words." "Didn't think someone that size could move so fast." That last one made her jaw tighten, but she let it go. She'd heard worse. She'd survive worse. Henry appeared at her elbow, grinning like a fool. "You did it! You actually did it!" "I'm not sure what I did," Marla said. Her hands were still shaking. "This doesn't feel real." "It's real, and it's going to change everything." He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "You understand that, right? This isn't just a win. This is your whole life changing." The weight of that statement settled over her like a heavy coat. 6 months of guaranteed work. Enough money to buy her own equipment, maybe even rent a real space. The possibility of independence she'd been chasing her whole life, and the absolute certainty that people would resent her for it. "I need to sit down," she said. Henry guided her to a nearby log, away from the main crowd. Marla sank onto it, her legs finally giving up the fight to hold her upright. The adrenaline that had been keeping her vertical was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "You should eat something," Henry said. "I can't. My stomach's in knots." Then just breathe. You've earned that much. She tried. Drew in air that tasted like smoke and mountain cold and possibility. Around them, the rendezvous continued its chaotic business. Traders haggling, trappers telling lies, the whole elaborate dance of commerce and survival happening like her win hadn't just upended everything. Rourke Maddox appeared in front of her so suddenly she almost fell off the log. "We need to talk," he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Marla looked up at him, her neck aching from the angle. "About what?" "About what happens next. You got somewhere we can speak privately?" "I've got a bedroll at the edge of camp. That private enough?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "That'll do." Henry stood up. "I should stay," Marla said quickly. Whatever Rourke wanted to discuss, she wanted a witness. Someone who'd confirm later that this conversation actually happened, that she hadn't imagined the whole thing. Rourke nodded once, accepting this. He settled onto the log across from them with the ease of someone who'd spent more time sitting on rocks than chairs. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just studied Marla with those iron-gray eyes. "That stew you made," he finally said. "Where'd you learn to layer flavors like that?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know, just seemed obvious. You can't throw everything in at once and expect it to taste right. Most people do exactly that." He paused. "You've got instinct, real instinct. Can't teach that. You didn't come over here to compliment my cooking." "No." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I came to tell you that winning today was the easy part. What comes after? That's where most people fail." Marla's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean you just embarrassed Eleanor Pierce in front of half the territory's trading community. Her family's got connections you can't imagine, money you can't compete with, and an investment in that railroad contract that goes way beyond feeding workers. So the fix was in. It wasn't a question. She'd already heard that conversation back at Sullivan's. The fix was attempted," Rourke corrected. "Didn't work because your food was undeniably better. But that doesn't mean they'll accept it. Means they'll try harder to take it away from you." "How?" 100 different ways, supplies suddenly getting expensive, equipment failing, accidents, rumors about your character or your hygiene or whatever else they think will stick. He met her eyes directly. "You need to be ready for a fight that's got nothing to do with cooking." Henry spoke up. "She's got people who'll stand with her. Good. She'll need them." Rourke shifted his attention back to Marla. "You got a plan for where you're going to set up? Contract starts in 2 weeks. You need a kitchen, storage, sleeping quarters for yourself. Can't do this out of a wagon." Marla hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't let herself plan beyond winning because planning felt like tempting fate. "I figured I'd find something." "You figured wrong. Everything within 50 miles of where that railroad crew's working is already owned or spoken for. Pierce family saw to that months ago." The hope that had been building in Marla's chest started to crack. "So what am I supposed to do? I won the contract fair. Fair doesn't matter if you can't fulfill it." Rourke stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. "But I might have a solution. You interested in hearing it?" "Do I have a choice?" "Always got a choice, but some choices are smarter than others." He looked at her for a long moment, like he was calculating something. "I own a trading post about 15 miles from where the survey crew's starting. Good location, solid building, plenty of space. Been trying to sell it for a year, but nobody wants to be that far from town." "And you're offering to sell it to me?" Marla couldn't keep the skepticism out of her voice. "With what money?" "I'm offering to partner with you. You handle the cooking, the food operation. I handle supplies, security, dealing with the business side. We split profits 60-40. "Whose favor?" "Yours. You're doing the real work." It sounded too good, too convenient. Marla had learned a long time ago that when something sounded too good, there was always a catch. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why would you do this?" Rourke was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its edge. "Because I'm tired of watching talent get crushed by people who've never worked an honest day in their lives. And because," he paused, "because my sister could cook like you. Had the same instinct, the same gift. She wanted to open her own place, serve her own food. But she was a woman, and she was poor, and she didn't fit what people thought a chef should look like. What happened to her? She gave up. Married some bastard who hit her when dinner wasn't ready on time. Died 10 years ago, worn out and angry, and never once getting to do what she was actually good at. His jaw tightened. I can't fix that. But maybe I can keep it from happening to someone else. The honesty in his voice was almost harder to take than the offer itself. Marla looked at Henry, who raised his eyebrows in a way that said, "Your call." 60-40, she said. "My favor. And I make all decisions about the kitchen. What we serve, how we serve it, who works there. You don't interfere." Agreed. And if the Pierce family comes after us, when they come after us, Rourke corrected. Not if. When. When they come after us, you don't fold. You don't negotiate away my position to make peace. This partnership ends. It ends clean, not with me getting sacrificed for convenience. Something like approval crossed Rourke's face. You've got spine. Good. You'll need it. He extended his hand. Deal? Marla looked at his hand. Calloused, scarred, the hand of someone who'd worked hard for everything he had. Not soft, not gentle, but honest. She took it. His grip was firm, brief. When he released her hand, the deal felt real in a way the wind hadn't yet. Pack up your things, he said. We leave at first light. Got a lot of work to do before that crew shows up. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the same abrupt efficiency he seemed to apply to everything. Henry let out a low whistle. Well, that just happened. Did it? Marla still felt like she was watching this from outside her body. This is real? Real as anything else out here. He squeezed her shoulder. You scared? Terrified. Good. Means you're paying attention. He stood up, stretching. Come on, let's get you some actual food. Can't face tomorrow on an empty stomach. They made their way to one of the food vendors, a grizzled old trapper selling elk stew from a massive iron pot. Henry paid before Marla could argue, and they found a quiet spot away from the main activity to eat. The stew was decent. Not great, but hot and filling. Marla ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Processing. Planning. Panicking in small, controlled doses. You think I made a mistake, Thibaut? She asked after a while. Partnering with Rourke? All of it. Entering the competition, accepting his offer. Not just walking away while I still can. Henry set down his bowl and looked at her seriously. You remember what you told me back at Sullivan's? When I asked why you kept working there even though Agnes treated you like dirt? Marla shook her head. You said, because staying alive means swallowing your pride sometimes. And I told you that wasn't living, that was just not dying yet. He leaned forward. Today, you stopped just not dying. You started living. Maybe it'll work out. Maybe it won't. But at least you're finally fighting for something instead of just surviving despite everything. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who'll lose everything if this fails. No. But I'm not the one who'll win everything if it works either. He picked up his bowl again. Life's a gamble out here, Marla. Always has been. Difference is, now you're gambling on yourself instead of on someone else's table. Before Marla could respond, a commotion erupted near the competition ground. Raised voices, the sound of something hitting the dirt. She and Henry stood simultaneously, drawn by the universal human instinct to investigate trouble. A crowd had formed in a tight circle. Marla pushed through, not gently, her size useful for once, until she could see what was happening. Eleanor Pierce stood in the center, her face flushed with rage, her carefully pinned hair coming loose. One of the judges, Catherine Thornwood, stood across from her, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. A farce, Eleanor was saying, her voice shaking. The judging was compromised. Maddox has a personal agenda. Rourke Maddox is the most impartial judge in this territory, Catherine said coldly. If you're implying he cheated, you better have evidence. The evidence is obvious. Look at who won. Look at her. Eleanor's hand swept toward where Marla stood at the edge of the crowd. She's not qualified. She's not professional. She's better than you, Catherine interrupted. Her food was better. Simple as that. That's impossible. Why? Because you spent more money on your setup? Because your family bought you the best training? Because you think skill correlates with social standing? Catherine stepped closer. I've been judging food for 30 years. I know good cooking when I taste it. And that woman's stew was the best thing I've put in my mouth since last summer in San Francisco. Your beef Wellington was technically competent and utterly forgettable. The crowd murmured. This was better than theater. Eleanor's face went from flushed to pale. My family will hear about this. I'm sure they will, and I'm sure they'll tell you the same thing I'm about to. You lost. Accept it with grace or don't accept it at all, but stop making a spectacle of yourself. For a moment, Marla thought Eleanor might actually attack Catherine. Her hands were clenched into fists, her whole body rigid with suppressed fury. But then someone touched her elbow, one of her assistants, and whatever violence she'd been contemplating drained away. This isn't over, Eleanor said quietly, dangerously. The contract might have your name on it now, but we'll see whose name it has in 6 months. She turned and walked away, her assistant scurrying after her like ducklings following a swan. The crowd parted for her, not out of respect, but out of the instinct to avoid someone radiating that much anger. Catherine caught Marla's eye across the dispersing crowd, nodded once, then she too turned and left. Henry whistled low. Well, she's going to be a problem. She already was a problem, Marla said. Now it's just official. They went back to finish their stew, but the food had gone cold and Marla's appetite had disappeared entirely. She forced herself to eat anyway. Waste was a sin she couldn't afford, but every bite sat heavy in her stomach. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. More people came by to congratulate her, some sincere, some clearly just curious about the woman who'd beaten Eleanor Pierce. Marla accepted their words with as much grace as she could manage, which wasn't much. She wasn't used to attention, didn't like it, wanted to crawl into her bedroll and hide until morning. But she stayed upright, smiled when it seemed appropriate, tried not to let anyone see how completely out of her depth she felt. As the sun finally set and the rendezvous settled into evening activities, drinking, gambling, the various ways people found to pass time in the mountains, Marla retreated to her small patch of ground at the camp's edge. She unrolled her bedding, checked her knives for the dozenth time, and tried to quiet her mind enough to sleep. It didn't work. She lay there staring up at the stars, her thoughts racing in circles. Tomorrow she'd leave with Rourke Maddox for a trading post she'd never seen. In 2 weeks, she'd start feeding a railroad crew of 40 men. In 6 months, she'd either have enough money to build something permanent, or she'd be right back where she started, broke, alone, looking for another kitchen to survive in. Can't sleep either? Marla turned her head. A figure approached from the darkness, female, carrying herself with the kind of careful dignity that spoke of too many years learning how to move through hostile spaces without causing offense. As she got closer, Marla recognized her. Catherine Thornwood, the judge who'd defended her earlier. "Lot on my mind," Marla said. "I imagine." Catherine settled onto the ground nearby with a soft grunt. "Knees aren't what they used to be. You didn't have to stand up for me like that, earlier, with Eleanor. Didn't do it for you. Did it for the truth." Catherine pulled out a pipe and started packing it with tobacco. "Though I suppose that amounts to the same thing in this case." "Why'd you really come over here?" Catherine struck a match, held it to the pipe, drew until the tobacco caught. The smell of it drifted over, sweet and slightly acrid. "Because I want to tell you something nobody told me when I started out." "What's that?" "That being the best won't protect you. If anything, it makes you more of a target." She exhaled smoke into the cooling air. "I opened my first restaurant in Denver 23 years ago. Had money saved, had training, had everything except the one thing that mattered, a husband or father to put their name on the deed. Took me 3 years to find a bank that would loan to a woman, another 2 to build enough reputation that customers would trust me." "But you succeeded." "Barely, and only because I got lucky. A newspaper writer came in, wrote a glowing review that brought in enough business to keep me afloat." She tapped ash from her pipe. "Point is, you're walking into a situation where the deck is stacked against you in ways you probably haven't imagined yet. Eleanor's family has money and connections. Rourke's a good man, but he's got enemies. And you," she looked at Marla directly, "you're everything this territory's power structure wants to keep down. Female, poor, and refusing to apologize for how you look." "So you're saying I should quit?" "I'm saying you should be ready. Ready for them to sabotage you. Ready for rumors that'll make your skin crawl. Ready to watch people who ate your food and praised it to your face turn around and tear you down behind your back." Catherine stood up, her knees popping audibly. "And I'm saying that when it gets bad, and it will get bad, You remember that you're not the first woman who had to fight for the right to do what she's good at, and you won't be the last. She walked away before Marla could respond, disappearing into the darkness as abruptly as she'd arrived. Marla lay back down, Catherine's words echoing in her head. Part of her wanted to dismiss them as pessimism, as the bitterness of someone who'd fought too many battles. But a larger part recognized the truth in what she'd said. This wasn't over. Winning the competition was just the opening move. Eventually, exhaustion won out over anxiety. Marla drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams full of fire and knives and crowds that wouldn't stop staring. When she woke, it was still dark. Pre-dawn darkness, the kind where you could feel morning coming but couldn't see it yet. Someone was shaking her shoulder. "Time to move," Rourke's voice said. Marla sat up, disoriented. "What? We're leaving early. Eleanor's people have been asking questions about where we're headed. Rather not give them time to set up any surprises." She was awake instantly. "What kind of surprises?" "The kind that makes travel difficult. Come on." Marla rolled up her bedding with practiced speed, gathered her few possessions, and followed Rourke through the pre-dawn camp. Most people were still asleep, the only movement coming from early traders packing up their goods. 2 horses waited at the camp's edge, both already saddled. A mule stood behind them, loaded with supplies. "You ride?" Rourke asked. "Not well, but I can stay on." "Good enough." He helped her mount, not an easy task given her size and the horse's evident uncertainty about carrying someone so heavy. But the animal settled after a moment, responding to Rourke's calm confidence. They rode out as the first gray light started painting the eastern sky. Behind them, the rendezvous camp slowly disappeared into the distance. Ahead, the mountains rose like broken teeth against the lightening horizon. Marla had never been this far into high country. The air was thinner here, harder to breathe. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh way, all granite and pine and cold running water. Beautiful, but unforgiving. Like everything else in her life, apparently. They rode in silence for the first hour. Marla focused on not falling off the horse, on breathing, on not thinking too hard about what she'd committed to. Rourke seemed comfortable with the quiet, his posture relaxed despite the early hour. Finally, as the sun broke over the peaks and flooded the valley with gold light, he spoke. "You know how to shoot?" The question surprised her. "A gun?" "No." "You're going to learn. Can't be out here without knowing how to defend yourself." "From what? Bears, mountain lions, men who think a woman alone is easy prey." He glanced back at her. "Don't look so worried. You're not alone. But you need to be able to handle yourself when I'm not around." "You planning on not being around?" "Planning on you being independent. That's what this partnership is. Me helping you get to a place where you don't need help anymore." It was possibly the most thoughtful thing anyone had ever said to her. Marla didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. Just nodded and kept riding. The sun climbed higher. The terrain got rougher. Around mid-morning, they stopped to rest the horses and eat. Rourke had brought dried meat and hard bread, trail food, nothing special. They ate quickly and moved on. It was early afternoon when they finally crested a ridge and Rourke pointed down into the valley below. "There, that's home." Marla followed his gesture. In the valley, surrounded by pine forest with a stream running nearby, sat a solid log building. 2 stories, with a covered porch and what looked like a separate structure for storage. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was there, keeping the place maintained. It looked real, permanent, like something that could last. "That's the trading post?" Marla asked. "Was. Will be again, if we do this right. Been mostly empty the past year, except for Jacob. He's the man who watches the place. Good fellow. Won't give you any trouble." They descended into the valley as the afternoon light turned everything golden. Up close, the building looked even more solid. Well-built, well-maintained, positioned perfectly to catch the morning sun and avoid the worst of the winter winds. Marla dismounted awkwardly, her legs protesting after hours in the saddle. She stood there looking at the building, trying to imagine herself living here, working here, making this place into something real. The door opened and a man emerged, tall, weathered, with a gray beard and the kind of face that had spent more time laughing than frowning. "Rourke," he said, his voice warm. "Didn't expect you back so soon. Plans changed. Jacob, this is Marla Vance. She's my new partner." Marla, Jacob Reeves. He keeps this place from falling apart. Jacob's eyes widened slightly when he saw Marla, but whatever thoughts he had stayed behind his teeth. He just smiled and extended his hand. Any partner of Rourke's is welcome here. His handshake was firm, his palm calloused. When he released her hand, he gestured to the building. You want the tour, or you want to rest first? Tour, Marla said immediately. She needed to see this place, understand it, figure out if it could possibly work for what they needed to do. Jacob led them inside. The main room was large, open, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. The kitchen area was in the back corner, basic but functional. Cast iron stove, good counter space, shelves for storage. Upstairs were sleeping quarters, 4 small rooms currently empty. We used to run a general store here, Jacob explained as they walked. Sold supplies to trappers, traders, anyone passing through. Did good business until the main trade route shifted south. Place has been quiet since. It won't be quiet much longer, Rourke said. He explained about the railroad contract, about the survey crew that would be working in the area, about their plan to turn the trading post into a kitchen operation. Jacob listened, nodding occasionally. When Rourke finished, he looked at Marla. You really win that competition fair. I did. And you really as good a cook as Rourke says? Better, Marla said, before she could stop herself. Jacob grinned. Then I guess we're in business. I can help with wood cutting, hauling water, general labor. Got no skill with cooking, but I can follow orders. That's all I need, Marla said. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Marla examined the kitchen space, mentally cataloging what they had and what they'd need. Rourke and Jacob discussed supply lines, costs, logistics. It was overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure. As evening approached and the light started to fade, Jacob cooked a simple dinner: venison, beans, more of that hard bread. They ate together at the long table in the main room, and for the first time since the competition, Marla felt something that might have been peace. This could work. It was a long shot, but it could actually work. After dinner, Rourke stood up. I'm riding back to town tomorrow. Need to finalize some contracts, pick up supplies, make sure certain people know we're serious about this. Certain people meaning the Pierce family, Marla said. Among others. He looked at her. You'll be all right here with Jacob. He'll show you the area, help you get settled. I'll be back in a week with everything we need to start. And if Eleanor's people show up? They won't. Not yet. They're still figuring out their next move. He paused. But when they do come, and they will, you stand your ground. Don't let them see doubt. Don't give them anything to use against you. After he left to check on the horses, Jacob poured them both coffee and sat back down. He's right, you know, the older man said. They will come. People like the Pierces don't accept defeat gracefully. I know. You scared? Marla thought about lying, then decided against it. Terrified. Good. Jacob sipped his coffee. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it keep you still. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds outside. Wind in the pines, the stream running, something small moving through the underbrush. Marla thought about everything that had led her here. Her mother's death, the boarding house, Mrs. Sullivan's casual cruelty. The competition. Rourke's unexpected partnership. All of it linking together like a chain, pulling her toward this moment, this place, this impossible possibility of something different. She didn't know if she could do this. Didn't know if she was strong enough, smart enough, stubborn enough to make this work against the forces that would try to crush her. But she was here. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't apologizing for taking up space. That had to count for something. The first week passed in a haze of physical labor that left Marla's body screaming and her mind too exhausted to spiral into doubt. Jacob woke her before dawn each day, and together they worked to transform the trading post's dusty kitchen into something functional. They scrubbed every surface until Marla's hands cracked and bled. They hauled water from the stream until her shoulders felt like they might separate from her body. They inventoried supplies, repaired broken shelving, patched holes in the walls where winter cold had crept through. The work was brutal, but it was also clarifying. On the third morning, while Marla was on her knees scrubbing the stone floor, Jacob spoke from the doorway. You know you don't have to do all this yourself. Could hire help. With what money? Marla didn't look up, just kept scrubbing. The stones were stained dark from years of spilled grease and neglect. Rourke would advance you. No. The word came out harder than she intended. She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. I start borrowing money before I've even begun. I'll spend the whole 6 months trying to climb out of debt instead of building something. Jacob was quiet for a moment. You're more like him than I expected. Like who? Rourke. He's the same way. Won't accept help even when he needs it. Stubborn as a mule with a burr under its saddle. That's supposed to be a compliment? Just an observation? Jacob moved into the room, picked up a second brush, and knelt down beside her. But since you're determined to do this the hard way, might as well have company. They worked in silence for a while. The only sound, the scrape of bristles against stone, and their own breathing. Marla found the rhythm soothing, mindless physical work that left no room for anxiety about everything she'd taken on. Can I ask you something? Jacob said eventually. Sure. Why cooking? I've known plenty of women who could cook. Most of them saw it as a chore, something they had to do. But you, he paused, searching for words. You make it sound like something else. Marla stopped scrubbing, sat back, stared at the floor she'd been cleaning. My mother used to say that feeding people was the most honest work there was, she said slowly. You can't fake it, can't pretend. Food is either good or it isn't. And when it's good, really good, it becomes something more than just fuel. It becomes memory, comfort, sometimes the only good thing in someone's day. That why you do it? I do it because it's the only thing I've ever been good at. The only thing people couldn't take away from me. She looked at her hands, raw, scarred, strong. They can take your money, your home, your dignity. But if you can cook, you can survive. Always. Jacob nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Rourke chose well. He chose desperately. I was the only option that wouldn't cost him. You really believe that? Marla shrugged and went back to scrubbing. She didn't know what she believed anymore. The past week had turned her entire understanding of herself inside out. She'd gone from being invisible to being noticed, from worthless to valuable. The shift was disorienting, like trying to walk on a floor that kept tilting. By the end of the week, the kitchen gleamed. The stove had been cleaned and repaired, the shelves restocked with basic supplies Jacob had on hand, the floor scrubbed until the original stone color showed through. It still wasn't much, not compared to what Eleanor Pierce probably worked with, but it was clean and functional and entirely Marla's. She stood in the doorway on the 7th evening, looking at what they'd accomplished, and felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Pride. Not the arrogant kind. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd built something with her own hands. That this space existed because she'd made it exist. Not bad, Jacob said from behind her. It'll do. Marla couldn't quite keep the smile off her face. Rourke should be back tomorrow with supplies. Then the real work starts. The reminder sent a spike of anxiety through her gut. The real work. Feeding 40 men 3 meals a day for 6 months. Proving she deserved the contract she'd won. Surviving whatever Eleanor Pierce and her family had planned. That night, Marla couldn't sleep. She lay in the small upstairs room Jacob had prepared for her. Just a bed and a trunk. Nothing fancy. And listened to the wind moving through the pines. Tomorrow would change everything. Again. She was getting tired of everything changing. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to the sound of horses and voices. Sunlight streamed through the window, later than she usually woke. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs. Rourke stood in the main room looking tired but satisfied. Behind him, 2 wagons sat in the yard, both loaded with supplies. A young man Marla didn't recognize was unhitching the horses. You're up, Rourke said when he saw her. Good, we've got a lot to unload. Is that everything? First shipment. Rest comes in 3 days. He gestured to the wagons. Flour, salt, sugar, coffee, dried beans, cornmeal, preserved meat, lard. Basics to get you started. You'll need to supplement with fresh game and whatever vegetables you can source locally. Marla moved to the nearest wagon and started examining the supplies. Good quality, most of it. Better than she'd expected. This must have cost... Don't worry about cost right now. Just worry about being ready when that crew shows up. Rourke pulled a folded paper from his coat. Speaking of which, got the official contract here. Need you to sign it." She took the paper with hands that wanted to shake. The contract was written in the formal language she'd seen on legal documents before. Lots of heretofore and party of the first part. But the essential details were clear. 6 months, 40 men, 3 meals daily, payment in gold, half up front, half on completion. The amount made her breath catch. "This is more than you said at the rendezvous. Railroad increased the budget. Seems they're serious about keeping their workers fed and happy." Rourke pulled out a pen. "You can read through the whole thing if you want, but the short version is, you cook, they pay, everyone's happy. Unless you don't cook, then you owe them the advance and they sue you for breach of contract." Comforting. "I don't deal in comfort. I deal in reality." He held out the pen. "You still want this?" Marla looked at the contract again, at the numbers that represented more money than she'd earned in her entire life combined, at the words that made this whole impossible situation legally binding. She took the pen and signed her name. Her handwriting was rough. She'd learned to write late, taught herself from newspapers and wanted posters. But it was legible. Marla Vance, right there in ink that couldn't be erased. Rourke witnessed the signature, then folded the contract and tucked it back in his coat. "You're committed now. No backing out." "Wasn't planning to." "Good." He turned to the young man who'd finished with the horses. "Marla, this is Thomas Banks. He's going to be helping with the heavy work, chopping wood, hauling water, general labor. Thomas, Marla Vance, she's in charge of the kitchen. What she says goes." Thomas looked maybe 19, with the gangly build of someone still growing into his frame. He nodded shyly at Marla. "Ma'am." "Just Marla, and thank you for the help." "Yes, Marla." They spent the rest of the day unloading supplies and organizing the kitchen. Thomas proved to be a hard worker, if a bit clumsy. He dropped a sack of flour that split open and sent white powder everywhere, apologized so profusely that Marla had to tell him twice to stop. "Accidents happen," she said, sweeping up the spilled flour. "Just be more careful next time." "Yes, ma'am." "Marla, sorry. His face went red. Jacob laughed from across the room. "Boy's nervous, probably never worked for a woman before." "I haven't," Thomas admitted. "My ma always did the cooking at home. Never thought much about it being actual work until now." "Well, it is," Marla said, "and it's hard work. You'll learn that quick enough." By evening, the kitchen was stocked and ready. Marla stood in the center of it, turning slowly, taking inventory. Cast iron pots hanging from hooks, knives sharpened and organized, dry goods stored properly. Fresh water in the barrel Jacob and Thomas had hauled up from the stream. Everything she needed to succeed, or fail spectacularly. Rourke appeared in the doorway. "Crew arrives in 5 days. You ready?" "No, but I will be." "That's the right answer." He paused, studying her face. "You look tired." "I am tired." "When's the last time you actually rested?" Marla had to think about it. "Before the rendezvous, I guess. That was 2 weeks ago. I'll rest when the contract's done." "You'll rest now or you'll collapse later and cost us both everything." Rourke's voice was firm. "Tomorrow, you do nothing. No cleaning, no cooking, no planning. You sleep, you walk around, you let your body recover. Because once that crew shows up, there won't be time to recover." "I can't just—" "You can, and you will. That's not a suggestion, Marla. That's a partner telling another partner to stop being stupid before stupidity becomes expensive." She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders made a more convincing case than her pride could counter. "Fine. One day." "Good." Rourke turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. Had an interesting conversation in town. Seems Eleanor Pierce has been telling people you cheated at the competition." Marla's stomach dropped. "What?" "Says you must have bribed the judges or slept with someone or used some kind of trickery. The stories vary depending on who's listening. That's not— I know. Everyone who matters knows. But the people who don't matter, they're the ones spreading the gossip." He met her eyes. "It's going to get worse before it gets better. You need to be ready for that." "How do I fight rumors?" "You don't. You let your work speak for itself. When those railroad men taste your food and keep coming back for more, the rumors won't matter." He paused. "But you have to survive until then. And that means not giving Eleanor or her people any ammunition, No mistakes, no shortcuts, everything perfect. The weight of that expectation settled over Marla like a heavy coat. Everything perfect, as if perfection was something she'd ever achieved at anything. After Rourke left, Marla sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. The day of forced rest he'd mandated suddenly felt less like a gift and more like a countdown. 4 days after tomorrow. 4 days until 40 hungry men showed up expecting food worth the money being paid. 4 days until she either proved Eleanor's rumors wrong or confirmed them. Jacob found her there an hour later, still sitting in the dark. "You all right?" he asked. "Just thinking. Dangerous pastime." He lit a lamp and set it on the table. The warm light pushed back the shadows. "Want to talk about it?" "What's there to talk about? Either I can do this or I can't." "That's not what's worrying you, though, is it?" Marla looked up at him. "What do you mean?" "You know you can cook, known it your whole life. What you're worried about is whether being good enough will matter when people have already decided you don't deserve this." He'd hit so close to the truth that Marla felt it like a punch. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been watching. Jacob sat down across from her. "You want to know what I think?" "Do I have a choice?" "Not really. I think you're so used to being told you're not good enough that even when you win, you can't quite believe it. So you keep waiting for someone to take it away, waiting for the other boot to drop. And if I'm right to wait, then at least you saw it coming. But you'll have spent all your energy on fear instead of on the work. And that's how you lose, not because someone took it from you, but because you were too scared to hold on to it properly." He stood up. "Get some sleep, Marla. Tomorrow you rest. Day after that, you cook." He left her alone with the lamplight and her thoughts. Marla tried to follow his advice, but sleep came in fragments. She'd doze off, then wake an hour later from dreams where she was cooking for an endless line of men who all had Eleanor Pierce's face. Finally, she gave up and went downstairs before dawn. The kitchen was cool and quiet. She stood in the center of it, breathing in the smell of wood and stone and possibility. This was hers, for now at least, and nobody could take it away without her knowing. She spent the mandated rest day walking the property, learning the land. The stream that ran behind the trading post was clear and cold, full of trout that Jacob said were easy to catch if you knew how. The forest pressed in close on 3 sides, pine and aspen thick enough to make travel difficult off the established paths. But it also meant game: deer, elk, maybe bear if they were unlucky. Thomas had been sent to town for more supplies, so it was just Marla and Jacob. The old man showed her where the root cellar was, how to tell which mushrooms were safe to eat, where the best hunting spots were. He talked while they walked, filling the silence with stories about the trading post's history, about Rourke, about the territory before the railroad started changing everything. "Used to be you could know everyone within 100 miles, he said as they sat by the stream eating the lunch he'd packed. "Now there's new faces every week, some good, some not. Hard to tell which is which until it's too late." "You think the railroad's a bad thing?" "I think change is change. Neither good nor bad on its own. Just depends on what you do with it." He tossed a stone into the water. "You're part of that change, you know. Woman running her own kitchen, making her own money, not answering to a husband or father, that threatens people." I noticed. "You ready for how much it threatens them?" Marla thought about Eleanor's face at the competition, about the rumors Rourke had mentioned, about Catherine Thornwood's warning that being the best would make her more of a target. "Probably not," she admitted, "but I'm here anyway." "That's what counts." Jacob stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. "Come on, want to show you something before we head back." He led her up a steep trail that climbed the ridge behind the trading post. Marla's legs burned with the effort, her breathing harsh in the thin mountain air. But when they reached the top, the view stole whatever breath she had left. The valley spread out below them like a map. She could see the trading post, small and solid against the green of the forest, the stream winding through the trees, and beyond that, stretching to the horizon, the vast expanse of territory that the railroad would soon cut through. "This is what you're part of now," Jacob said quietly. "All of it. Big enough that what Eleanor Pierce thinks doesn't matter. Big enough that there's room for someone like you to build something real." Marla stared at the view, trying to let his words sink in, but all she could think about was how small the trading post looked from up here. How easy it would be for something that small to disappear. They made their way back down as the afternoon light started to fade. Marla was exhausted, a good exhaustion, earned through movement rather than anxiety. When they reached the trading post, Thomas was back with another wagon of supplies. "Got everything on the list," he said, jumping down from the driver's seat. "And there's a letter for you, Marla. Man in town said it was urgent." He handed her a sealed envelope. The paper was expensive, the handwriting elegant. Marla didn't recognize it, but something about the weight of it made her stomach tighten. She broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet. The message was brief. "Miss Vance, I would like to meet with you regarding the railroad contract. I believe we have much to discuss, but please come to the Bridgers Crossing Hotel at your earliest convenience. Eleanor Pierce." Marla read it twice, trying to parse the meaning beneath the polite words. "What is it?" Jacob asked. She handed him the letter. He read it, his expression darkening. "It's a trap. Maybe. Or maybe she wants to negotiate." "Negotiate what? You won the contract fair. There's nothing to negotiate." "Then why send the letter?" "To rattle you, to make you nervous, to see if you'll come running when she calls." Jacob handed the letter back. "Don't go." "I have to. If I don't, she'll say I was too scared to face her." "So what? Let her say it. I can't afford to look weak right now. You said it yourself, people are already questioning whether I deserve this. If I hide from Eleanor, that just confirms what they think." Thomas looked between them, uncertain. Should I go with you? For protection or something?" "No." Marla folded the letter and tucked it in her pocket. "But thank you." She spent the evening preparing, though she wasn't sure what she was preparing for. A confrontation? An attempt at intimidation? An actual business discussion? With someone like Eleanor, it could be any of those or all of them at once. Rourke arrived just after dark, his horse lathered from hard riding. He dismounted and came straight to where Marla was sitting on the porch. "Heard you got a letter from Eleanor Pierce." Word traveled fast in this territory. "How did you—" "The hotel clerk is a friend. He sent a messenger." Rourke sat down next to her, his expression grim. "You can't go." "Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. Eleanor doesn't want to negotiate. She wants to humiliate you, make you come crawling to her hotel so she can publicly reject whatever you offer and make you look desperate. Then I'll offer nothing. Just hear what she has to say. And when she accuses you of something you didn't do, when she makes demands you can't meet, when she turns the whole thing into theater designed to make you look small?" Rourke shook his head. "You go into that hotel, you're playing her game on her ground. You can't win." "Maybe winning isn't the point. Then what is?" Marla struggled to put it into words. "All my life, people like Eleanor have made decisions about me without ever talking to me, without seeing me as a person. I'm just this thing they react to, this body they judge, this problem they solve by pretending I don't exist." She met his eyes. "She sent me a letter. She acknowledged I exist. And maybe that doesn't mean anything. Maybe it's just manipulation. But I need to look her in the eye and let her see that I'm not going away." Rourke was quiet for a long moment. "You're braver than you think you are. Or stupider. Sometimes they're the same thing." He stood up. "If you're determined to do this, I'm coming with you. That'll make it look like I need protection. You do need protection. Eleanor's people are dangerous. Not in an obvious way. They won't hurt you physically, but they'll destroy you financially, socially, any way they can. Having me there sends a message that you're not alone." Marla wanted to argue, but the truth was she did feel better knowing Rourke would be there. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. We'll ride in together, have the meeting, ride out same day. Don't want to give them time to prepare any surprises." That night, Marla barely slept again. She kept imagining different versions of the meeting. Eleanor offering money to buy her out, Eleanor threatening legal action, Eleanor simply laughing in her face. None of the scenarios ended well. Dawn came gray and cold. Marla dressed in her best clothes, which wasn't saying much, a plain dress that was clean but worn, her hair braided back simply. She looked like exactly what she was, a working woman trying to hold on to something she'd earned. Rourke was already waiting with the horses when she came downstairs. They rode out without speaking, the silence heavy with anticipation. The journey to Bridgers Crossing took most of the morning. The town looked the same as it had when Marla left. Dusty, busy, indifferent to individual struggles. But now she saw it differently. Now she was someone with a contract, with property, with a partner. Still small, still vulnerable, but no longer invisible. The Bridgers Crossing Hotel was the nicest building in town. 2 stories of painted wood with actual glass windows and a porch that didn't sag. Marla had never been inside. Never had reason to. They tied their horses and walked up the steps together. The lobby was cool and dim, furnished with chairs that looked like they'd been shipped from back east. A clerk stood behind the desk, eyeing them with barely concealed disdain. "We're here to see Eleanor Pierce," Rourke said, his voice flat and businesslike. The clerk's expression shifted to something more carefully neutral. "Of course. She's expecting you. 2nd floor, room 7. They climbed the stairs, their footsteps loud on the polished wood. Marla's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. This was it. Whatever happened in the next hour would determine how the rest of this played out. Rourke knocked on door 7. "Come in," a voice called. He opened the door and stepped aside, letting Marla enter first. The room was lavishly appointed. Thick carpet, upholstered furniture, curtains that probably cost more than Marla's entire wardrobe. And sitting in a chair by the window, looking every inch the successful businesswoman, was Eleanor Pierce. She stood as they entered, her smile sharp and controlled. "Miss Vance, thank you for coming. And Mr. Maddox, I hadn't expected you." "Marla's my partner," Rourke said simply. "Where she goes, I go." "How protective." Eleanor's eyes flicked to Marla. "Please, sit. Would you like tea?" "We're not here for tea," Marla said, remaining standing. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Eleanor's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Direct. I appreciate that." "Very well, I'll be equally direct. I want to buy your contract." The offer hung in the air like smoke. "It's not for sale," Marla said. "Everything's for sale at the right price. I'm prepared to offer you $5,000, cash, today. You sign the contract over to me, walk away with more money than you'd make in 10 years, and we all move forward." $5,000. The number was staggering, life-changing, enough to set herself up anywhere, do anything, enough to prove Eleanor right, that Marla could be bought. "No," Marla said. Eleanor's expression hardened. "You should think carefully before refusing." "I don't need to think. The answer's no." 10,000. The room went very still. $10,000 was more money than Marla could properly imagine. Enough to buy land, build a real restaurant, never work for anyone else again. Enough to escape this whole situation before it turned ugly. Enough to spend the rest of her life knowing she'd run. "No," Marla repeated. Eleanor stood up, her posture rigid with barely controlled anger. "You're making a mistake. I'm trying to help you here, trying to give you an out before things get difficult." "Difficult how?" "There are questions about the legitimacy of the competition results. Questions about whether proper procedures were followed. I've been asked to initiate a formal review." "By who?" "By interested parties in the territorial government. People who want to ensure that railroad contracts are awarded fairly and without bias." Rourke's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You mean people your family paid to ask questions? That's not an investigation. That's theater." "Careful, Mr. Maddox. Accusations of corruption are serious. So are offers that sound more like threats." Eleanor turned her attention back to Marla. "Last chance. Take the money. Walk away while you still can with your dignity intact." Marla looked at this woman, educated, wealthy, backed by power and privilege, trying to buy away someone she considered beneath her. And something in Marla's chest solidified into something harder than fear. "My dignity's not for sale," she said quietly. "Neither is my contract. We're done here." She turned and walked to the door. Behind her, Eleanor's voice went cold. "You'll regret this." Marla stopped, hand on the doorknob. Turned back. "Maybe. But at least I'll regret something I chose instead of something I let you choose for me." She walked out, Rourke following close behind. They didn't speak until they were back on their horses and riding out of town. Then Rourke said, "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the dumbest." "Probably both." "She meant what she said, about making things difficult." "I know. And you're ready for that?" Marla thought about the trading post, about the kitchen she'd scrubbed until her hands bled, about the contract with her name on it in permanent ink, about everything she stood to lose if this went wrong. I'm ready to try, she said. It would have to be enough. The railroad crew arrived 2 days early. Marla was in the kitchen testing bread recipes when she heard the sound of wagons and voices. Her stomach dropped. She wasn't ready. The soup she'd planned for their first meal was still simmering, the vegetables not yet chopped, the table settings not arranged. 2 days early meant 2 days less preparation, 2 days less certainty that she could actually do this. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. 12 wagons stretched along the road leading to the trading post. Men were already climbing down, stretching, looking around at their new temporary home. Most of them looked exhausted, trail-worn and dusty, the kind of tired that came from weeks of hard travel. A man in his 50s with a thick mustache and the bearing of someone used to command approached the porch. "This the kitchen operation?" Marla forced her voice steady. "It is. I'm Marla Vance." His eyebrows went up slightly. Whatever he'd expected, it clearly wasn't her. But to his credit, he recovered quickly. "Benjamin Walsh, crew foreman. We were told meals would be ready starting today." "You were told 2 days from now." "Plans changed. Railroad wants us started on the survey work immediately." He looked past her toward the kitchen. "Is that going to be a problem?" Every fiber of Marla's being wanted to say yes. It was a problem. They couldn't just show up early and expect her to scramble. But she'd learned a long time ago that the only response that mattered was whether you could deliver. "No problem," she said. "Dinner will be ready at 6. Breakfast tomorrow at 5:30. Walsh studied her face, looking for the lie. When he didn't find it, he nodded. "Appreciated. Men are tired and hungry. A good meal would go a long way." He turned and started shouting orders to his crew. Marla went back inside, her heart hammering. Jacob appeared from the back room. "They're early. 2 days early." "Can you do it?" Marla looked at the partially prepared soup, at the bread dough that needed another hour to rise, at the mountain of work that stood between her and a meal for 40 men. "I don't have a choice." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got. Now stop talking and start chopping vegetables. We've got 4 hours. They worked like they were fighting a fire. Jacob handled the vegetables while Thomas hauled water and kept the fires burning. Marla moved between 3 different pots, adjusting seasoning, testing temperatures, her mind racing through calculations of portions and timing. The soup was beef and barley, simple, hearty, the kind of food that stuck to your ribs. She'd made it 1,000 times before, could do it in her sleep, but never for 40 men. Never with this much riding on it. At 5:30, Rourke rode in with another wagon of supplies. He took one look at the chaos in the kitchen and immediately started helping. No questions, no commentary, just rolling up his sleeves and doing whatever needed doing. By 6 o'clock, the tables were set up in the main room and extending onto the porch. The soup was ready, the bread sliced, butter and salt set out. Marla stood at the kitchen entrance, her clothes soaked with sweat, her hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. Benjamin Walsh rang a bell, and the men started filing in. They looked skeptical. Marla could see it in their faces, the doubt, the barely concealed disappointment. They'd been expecting something else. Someone else. A few of them looked at her directly, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open disdain. One younger man, couldn't have been more than 20, elbowed his companion and said something too quiet to hear. Both of them laughed. Marla's face burned, but she kept her expression neutral. "Bowls are at the end of each table," she said, loud enough to carry. "Serve yourselves. There's plenty, so don't be shy." The men settled in, the room filling with the scrape of chairs and low conversation. Marla ladled soup into the first bowl handed to her, then stepped back to let them help themselves. She couldn't watch, couldn't stand there waiting for their reactions. So she retreated to the kitchen and started preparing for breakfast. Behind her, the main room went quiet. Then someone said, "Christ, this is good." Another voice, "Better than good. This is the best thing I've eaten in months." Marla's hands froze on the bread dough she'd been kneading. "Told you the contract was legitimate," Benjamin Walsh's voice carried clearly. "You don't cook like this unless you know what you're doing." More murmurs of agreement, the sound of spoons scraping bowls, someone asking for seconds. Jacob appeared in the kitchen doorway, grinning. "Might want to come take a bow. I'm not done working." "Marla." He caught her arm gently. "They need to see you're real. That you're the one who made this. Otherwise, the rumors will start that Rourke's doing the cooking and you're just the front. She hadn't thought of that, hadn't considered that even success could be twisted into doubt. Reluctantly, she wiped her hands and followed Jacob into the main room. The conversation didn't stop, but it shifted. Men glanced at her, some nodding acknowledgement, others just staring. Benjamin Walsh stood up. "Miss Vance? On behalf of the crew, thank you. This is exactly what we needed." "Just doing the job I was hired for," Marla said. "Well, you're doing it damn well." He raised his voice. "3 cheers for the cook, boys." The response was enthusiastic, if not universal. Most of the men cheered. A few remained silent, their expressions carefully neutral. Marla noticed them, cataloged their faces for future reference. Those were the ones who'd be problems. She excused herself and went back to the kitchen. The praise felt good, but it also felt dangerous, like something that could be taken away as quickly as it had been given. The evening stretched into night. Marla cleaned while the men finished eating, then cleaned again after they left for their tents. By the time she was done, her entire body ached. She collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table, too tired to even climb the stairs to her room. Rourke found her there an hour later, half asleep with her head on her arms. "You did good today," he said quietly. "I survived today." "That's the same thing out here." He set a cup of coffee in front of her. "Drink. You've got to be up in 4 hours to start breakfast." The reminder made her want to cry. 4 hours. Then another day just like this one. Then another. For 6 months. "I can't do this," she said. "You just did." "Once. I did it once. And they showed up early and I barely managed, and tomorrow they'll expect the same quality, and I don't know if—" "Marla," Rourke's voice was firm. "Stop. You're spiraling. I'm being realistic." "No, you're being scared. There's a difference." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "You know what I learned running supply lines for the Army? That the first day is always chaos. Always. Doesn't matter how much you prepare. Something goes wrong, plans change, you scramble. But the second day is easier, and the third day easier than that. Not because the work gets lighter, but because you learn the rhythm." "What if I can't learn the rhythm?" "Then you'll fail. But you won't fail because you're not capable. You'll fail because you convinced yourself you weren't capable, and that became a self-fulfilling prophecy." He pushed the coffee closer to her. "Drink, sleep 4 hours, get up and do it again. Stop thinking past tomorrow." She wanted to argue, but she was too tired, and he was making too much sense. The coffee was strong and bitter. She drank it anyway. 4 hours later, she was back in the kitchen starting breakfast. Porridge with honey and dried fruit, bacon. Fresh bread from the dough she'd prepared the night before. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The men filed in, looking marginally more human than they had at dinner. A few of them thanked her as they served themselves. Most just ate in silence, focused on getting food into their bodies before the day's work began. Benjamin Walsh stopped by the kitchen on his way out. "Crew's got to be at the survey site by 7. We'll be back around 6 for dinner. That work?" "That's fine." "Good." He hesitated. "Look, I heard some of the men talking last night. Most of them are pleased, but there's a few who aren't happy about—" He stopped, searching for diplomatic words. "About me," Marla finished. "About the arrangement," he said carefully. "They think a woman can't handle this kind of operation long term, that you'll crack under the pressure or the work will suffer." "And what do you think?" "I think if last night's dinner and this morning's breakfast are any indication, those men are idiots. But I wanted you to know, so you're not blindsided if they start causing trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Complaints to the railroad, requests for a different arrangement, maybe just being difficult about mealtimes or portions." Walsh's jaw tightened. "I'll handle it if it becomes a problem. Just wanted you aware." After he left, Marla stood in the kitchen feeling the familiar weight of other people's doubt settling over her shoulders. She'd been naive to think winning the competition would be enough, to think that cooking well would silence the critics. The work continued. Breakfast cleanup, then starting preparations for dinner, inventory of supplies, planning the next day's menu. The rhythm Rourke had promised started to emerge, but it was exhausting. Every meal felt like a test she had to pass perfectly or risk losing everything. 3 days in, the first real problem arrived. Marla was in the root cellar checking on the stored vegetables when she heard raised voices above. She climbed the ladder to find Thomas backing away from a large man in work clothes, his face flushed with anger. "Telling you, the bacon was bad. Made half the crew sick. The bacon was fine this morning, Marla said, stepping between them. I checked it myself. The man turned to her, his expression openly hostile. Then you checked wrong. 3 men are in their tents right now puking their guts out. From breakfast? What else would it be from? Marla's mind raced. She'd been careful, had cooked everything properly, had tasted every dish herself. If the food was contaminated, she'd be sick too. I'll go check on them. Don't bother. Already sent word to the railroad. They'll be sending a doctor to verify food poisoning. The words hit like a physical blow. Food poisoning. If a doctor confirmed it, if it went into an official report, her contract could be terminated. Everything would be over. Let me talk to the men, she said. What's there to talk about? They're sick. You fed them. Pretty simple math. Rourke appeared from the back room, his presence immediately changing the dynamic. Problem, Harris? The big man, Harris, straightened slightly. Just reporting a health concern. Like we're supposed to. And you're sure it's food-related? What else would it be? Could be they drank bad water. Could be they ate something on the trail yesterday. Could be they're trying to cause trouble for a cook they don't think belongs here. Rourke's voice was flat, dangerous. Which is it? Harris's face reddened. I don't appreciate the accusation. And I don't appreciate people trying to sabotage my business partner. So we're even. The doctor will determine what happened. Yes, he will. And if he finds the food was fine, we'll be having a different conversation. About false accusations. And what happens to men who make them? Harris left without another word, but his departure felt more like a retreat to regroup than an actual surrender. Marla sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. If those men are actually sick, they're not sick from your food, Rourke said firmly. Harris has been complaining since day one. This is him escalating. But what if the doctor... Then we deal with it, but panicking now doesn't help. Jacob appeared in the doorway. Went and checked on those supposedly sick men. 2 of them are fine, playing cards in their tent. The 3rd is hungover. I could smell the whiskey from 10 feet away. Relief flooded through Marla so strongly she felt dizzy. So they're lying. Harris is lying. The men probably just went along with it because he's a bully and they didn't want to cross him. Jacob crossed his arms. Question is, what are you going to do about it? What can I do? If I confront him, it looks defensive. If I ignore it, he'll keep trying. Then you outwork him, Rourke said. Make tonight's dinner so good that when the doctor shows up tomorrow, every single man in that crew will vouch for your cooking. Make it impossible for Harris to find allies. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the only one available. Marla spent the afternoon preparing the best meal she could manage. Roasted venison with herb crust. Root vegetables glazed with honey, fresh bread with butter, apple pie made from the dried fruit in storage, reconstituted and spiced perfectly. When the crew filed in for dinner, the smell alone made several of them groan with appreciation. Harris sat at the far end of the table, his expression sour. Marla served his portion personally, meeting his eyes as she set the plate down. Hope this meets your standards, she said quietly. He didn't respond. Just stared at the food like it had personally offended him. The rest of the crew ate with enthusiasm, bordering on reverence. The venison was perfectly cooked, the vegetables sweet and savory, the pie a revelation that had grown men closing their eyes to savor it. Benjamin Walsh stood up when the meal was finished. Miss Vance, I don't know how you do it, but that was exceptional. Best meal I've had since leaving St. Louis. Scattered applause. Even some of the men who'd been skeptical were nodding agreement. Harris pushed his plate away. His food barely touched. I'll stick with my original assessment. Something's not right here. The room went quiet. Walsh turned to face him. Harris, you want to explain what your problem actually is? Because I'm getting tired of your complaints. My problem is we're being fed by someone who's not qualified. And when I raised legitimate health concerns, I got threatened instead of taken seriously. Your health concerns were 3 men who aren't sick, Walsh said coldly. I checked on them myself. They're fine, which means you either lied or you're incompetent. Either way, you're done making accusations. Harris stood up, his chair scraping loudly. You're making a mistake trusting her, all of you. Just wait. She'll fail, and when she does, we'll all suffer for it. He stalked out. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Walsh shook his head. I apologize, Miss Vance. Some men just can't accept progress. It's fine, Marla said, though it wasn't. It really wasn't. After the crew left, she cleaned the kitchen mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Harris wasn't going to stop. He'd keep pushing, keep finding ways to undermine her, until something broke. The doctor arrived the next morning, a thin, precise man named Anderson who examined the 3 supposedly sick crew members and pronounced them perfectly healthy. He sampled the kitchen's food stores, inspected the cooking area, and wrote out a report declaring everything satisfactory. "Cleanest camp kitchen I've seen," he told Marla before leaving. "Whatever complaints were filed, they're groundless." It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like a temporary reprieve. That afternoon, a rider arrived with a letter. Marla recognized the expensive paper before she even opened it. Inside was a formal notice from the Territorial Land Office. Someone had filed a claim disputing the trading post property boundaries. Until the dispute was resolved, all business operations were technically in violation of territorial law. The signature at the bottom belonged to a lawyer Marla had never heard of, but she'd bet everything she owned that Eleanor Pierce had heard of him. Rourke read the letter twice, his expression darkening with each pass. "This is harassment, pure and simple. Can they actually shut us down?" "Not immediately. Property disputes take months to resolve, but they can make things difficult. Inspections, paperwork, legal fees." He crumpled the letter. "It's designed to drain resources and create uncertainty. So what do? We hire our own lawyer, fight back, and we keep cooking." He met her eyes. "This is what Eleanor meant when she said things would get difficult. She's trying to drown you in problems until you give up." "I'm not giving up." "I know. That's why she's going to keep escalating." The next 2 weeks were brutal. The property dispute meant regular visits from territorial officials who poked around the kitchen, asked invasive questions, and generally made operations difficult. Harris continued his campaign of quiet sabotage, complaining about portion sizes, questioning ingredient quality, encouraging other men to be difficult. But the food remained undeniably good. Even Harris couldn't argue with results when the crew kept coming back for seconds and thirds, when men who'd been skeptical started defending Marla to anyone who'd listen. Benjamin Walsh became an unexpected ally. He made it clear that complaints about the food would be taken seriously only if they had merit, and so far, none of them had. Harris found himself increasingly isolated, his criticism falling on deaf ears. Then the supplies started arriving late. First it was flour, 2 days behind schedule, which meant Marla had to stretch what she had and adjust menus. Then coffee, then sugar, then fresh vegetables that should have come from a local supplier Rourke had arranged. Each delay came with a different excuse. Weather, transportation issues, supplier problems. But the pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. "They're interfering with the supply chain," Rourke said after the 3rd delayed shipment in a week. "Probably paying suppliers to prioritize other customers, or just refusing to do business with us." "Can they do that?" "It's not illegal to choose your customers. And if someone's offering enough money..." He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Marla stood in the kitchen, looking at the diminishing supplies, doing calculations in her head. She could make it work for maybe another week if she was creative. After that, she'd have to start reducing portions or simplifying menus. Either option would give Harris and his allies exactly the ammunition they needed. "I need to go into town," she said. "Find suppliers who aren't connected to the Pierce family. That's most of the territory. Eleanor's family has connections everywhere. Then I'll find the ones they missed. Or I'll go further out. Or I'll hunt and forage every damn ingredient myself if that's what it takes." Marla turned to face him. "I'm not failing because of supply problems. I'm just not." The determination in her voice must have convinced him, because he nodded. "I'll come with you. We'll leave tomorrow." They rode out at dawn, heading for the smaller settlements that dotted the territory. Places too poor or too independent to care about Pierce family politics. It took 3 days of hard travel, but Marla found what she needed, a network of small farmers, hunters, and traders who were willing to work with her. The prices were higher, the quality more variable. But it was food, and that was all that mattered. When they returned to the trading post, Jacob met them with news that made Marla's stomach drop. Railroad inspector came by, said there'd been complaints about the contract fulfillment. He's coming back next week to do a formal evaluation. Complaints from who? Wouldn't say, but I've got a pretty good guess. Marla had the same guess. Eleanor wasn't just attacking the supply chain, she was attacking the contract itself, trying to create an official paper trail of problems that would justify termination. The next week was the hardest of Marla's life. She cooked like her existence depended on it, because it did. Every meal was perfect, every portion generous, every complaint addressed immediately. She barely slept, barely rested, running on determination and desperation in equal measure. When the inspector arrived, he was accompanied by 2 railroad officials and a stenographer to record everything. They watched Marla work, examined the kitchen, interviewed crew members, reviewed supply records and menus, and every scrap of documentation Rourke had insisted they maintain. Marla cooked through it all, her hands steady even as her insides churned with anxiety. This was it, the moment that would determine whether she survived or lost everything. After 2 days of inspection, the officials called a meeting. The entire crew gathered, along with Marla, Rourke, and Jacob. The lead inspector, a severe man named Peterson, stood at the front with a folder of papers. "I've completed my evaluation of the contract fulfillment," he said, his voice carrying no emotion. "I've reviewed the complaints, examined the operations, and interviewed the crew." Marla's hands were clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. "Based on my findings, the complaints are without merit. The food quality is exceptional. The kitchen operations exceed territorial health standards, and crew satisfaction is among the highest I've seen in any camp operation." Relief hit Marla so hard she had to lock her knees to keep from falling. "However," Peterson continued, and her heart sank again, "there are concerns about the ongoing property dispute and supply chain irregularities. These issues don't affect current operations, but could impact future sustainability. I'm recommending the contract remain in place but be subject to monthly reviews until these external issues are resolved." It wasn't a complete victory, but it wasn't a loss either. Marla would take it. After the officials left, Benjamin Walsh approached her. "You survived. That's more than Eleanor expected." "This isn't over." "No, but you're still standing. That counts for something." He paused. "For what it's worth, the crew's behind you. Even the ones who had doubts at the start. You've proven yourself. That's not nothing." That night, Marla sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Rourke joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You did it," he said. "I survived another inspection? There's a difference." "Not out here, there isn't." He handed her a cup. "Eleanor's going to keep coming. You know that." "I know. The question is whether you can keep fighting, whether it's worth it." Marla thought about that, about the exhaustion that had settled into her bones, about the constant anxiety, the never-ending battles, the weight of knowing that people were actively working to destroy what she'd built. Then she thought about the crew members who'd thanked her after dinner, about Jacob's steady support, about standing in her own kitchen, cooking food that mattered, being something more than invisible. "It's worth it," she said, "because giving up would mean Eleanor won, and Marla Vance had spent her entire life refusing to give people like Eleanor that satisfaction." The notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, delivered by a nervous-looking clerk who wouldn't meet Marla's eyes. She read it 3 times, each pass making the words feel more real and more impossible simultaneously. Eviction. 30 days. Property dispute resolved in favor of the claimant. All operations to cease immediately upon expiration of notice period. Marla's hands didn't shake. That surprised her. She'd expected her body to react. Trembling, tears, some physical manifestation of the devastation currently hollowing out her chest. Instead, she just felt cold, numb, like she was watching this happen to someone else. "Miss Vance?" The clerk shifted his weight. "I need you to sign for receipt." She signed. Her handwriting looked steadier than it had any right to be. After the clerk left, Marla sat at the kitchen table with the notice in front of her. 30 days. In 30 days, everything she'd built would be gone. The contract, the kitchen, the first real chance she'd ever had at independence, all of it evaporating because Eleanor Pierce's family had enough money and connections to rewrite property records. Rourke found her there an hour later, still staring at the paper. "I heard," he said quietly. "How?" Clerk stopped at the saloon in town, talked about serving the notice to that big woman up at Maddox's place. Word travels. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "I've got my lawyer looking into it, seeing if there's grounds to appeal. And if there isn't, then we find another location, move the operation, The contract's with you, not with this building. In 30 days? While still cooking 3 meals a day for 40 men? Marla's laugh was bitter. We'd need to find property, negotiate terms, move all the equipment, establish new supply lines. That's months of work. So we work fast. We work miracles, you mean? She pushed the notice across the table toward him. Look at the signature. Judge Marcus Hendricks. You know who appointed him to the territorial bench? Rourke's jaw tightened. Eleanor's uncle. This was never a property dispute. It was a land grab with legal paperwork attached. They waited until I was established, until walking away would hurt the most, and then they pulled the rug out. Marla stood up, needing to move, needing to do something with the rage building in her chest. And there's nothing I can do about it. Nothing. Because people like the Pierces don't play fair, and the system's designed to protect them. So what are you going to do? The question stopped her. She turned to look at Rourke, this man who'd taken a chance on her when no one else would, who'd stood beside her through every attack, who was still sitting there asking what she'd do. Like the answer mattered. I don't know, she admitted. For the first time in my life, I actually don't know. The news spread through the crew by dinner time. Marla could feel the shift in atmosphere, the worried glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when she walked past. These men had gotten used to eating well, had started to trust that the food would be good, that someone was taking care of them properly. Now that certainty was crumbling. Harris sat at his usual spot, looking more satisfied than he had in weeks. Shame about the eviction, he said loudly enough to Carrie. But I suppose it was inevitable. Some people just aren't meant to succeed at this level. Benjamin Walsh slammed his cup down hard enough to rattle the table. Harris, I swear to all that's holy, if you don't shut your mouth right now. What? I'm just stating facts. Woman tries to run a business in territory she doesn't understand with people working against her, and it falls apart. That's not cruelty. That's reality. Reality is you've been undermining her since day one, Walsh shot back. Reality is she's fed you better than you've eaten in your miserable life, and you've repaid that by being a petty, jealous bastard. The room had gone completely silent. Every man there was watching, waiting to see how this would play out. Marla stepped into the doorway. That's enough. Both men turned to look at her. Harris, you've made your feelings clear from the start. I'm not going to argue with you about them. She met his eyes directly. But you're right about one thing. Some people aren't meant to succeed at this level. The question is which of us that applies to. She went back to the kitchen before he could respond. That night, Marla couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through possibilities that all led to the same dead end. Without the trading post, she had nowhere to fulfill the contract. Without fulfilling the contract, she'd lose the income she needed to establish herself anywhere else. And even if she could find another location, Eleanor would just attack that too. The woman had infinite resources and patience. Marla had 30 days and desperation. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. The kitchen was dark and quiet, still holding the warmth from the day's cooking. She lit a lamp and started preparing bread dough for the morning, needing the familiar rhythm of needing to quiet her thoughts. She was shaping loaves when she heard footsteps on the porch. Marla tensed, reaching for the knife she kept near the work table. But the voice that called out was female and vaguely familiar. Miss Vance? It's Catherine Thornwood. May I come in? Marla set down the knife and went to open the door. Catherine stood there in traveling clothes, looking tired but determined. Little late for a social call, Marla said. This isn't social, and I apologize for the hour, but I wanted to talk to you before anyone knew I was here. Catherine glanced behind her. May I? Marla stepped aside, letting her in. She gestured to the table, and they both sat. I heard about the eviction notice, Catherine said without preamble. Everyone's heard. Apparently my failures are entertaining gossip. It's not failure, it's sabotage. There's a difference. Catherine pulled a folder from her bag and set it on the table. I've been doing some investigating, quietly, through people I trust, and I found some interesting things about Judge Hendricks and the property claim he ruled on. Marla's heart started beating faster. What kind of things? The kind that suggests the ruling was predetermined, that the evidence presented was fabricated, that money changed hands to ensure the outcome Eleanor wanted. Catherine opened the folder. I have affidavits from 3 people willing to testify that Pierce family lawyers approached them about falsifying documents, bank records showing payments to the judge's clerk, correspondence between Eleanor and her uncle discussing the timeline for resolving your situation. Marla stared at the papers. This is evidence of corruption. Yes. If this got out, Hendricks would be removed from the bench. Eleanor's family would be investigated. She stopped, understanding dawning. They'd come after anyone who exposed them. Probably. Catherine's expression was calm. Which is why I'm giving you the choice. You can use this. Take it to the territorial governor, demand an investigation, fight back publicly. Or you can let it go. Find another location, start over somewhere they can't touch you, and survive by being invisible again. Why are you doing this? Because I'm tired of watching talented women get crushed by mediocre men with money. Catherine's voice hardened. And because I've spent 20 years playing it safe, keeping my head down, never making waves. It's kept me alive and successful, but it's also kept me small. And I'm done being small. Marla looked at the folder, at the evidence that could change everything or destroy them both, at the choice between safety and justice that wasn't really a choice at all because she already knew what she was going to do. If I use this, they'll retaliate, not just against me, against you, against anyone who helps. I know. You could lose your restaurant, your reputation, everything you've built. I know that too. Catherine met her eyes. But some things are worth losing everything for. And watching you fight this hard, refuse to disappear this completely, it reminded me that I used to believe that too. Marla picked up the folder, felt the weight of it, the possibility, the danger. I need to think about this. Take the night. But Marla, Catherine stood up. Whatever you decide, decide it because it's what you want. Not because you're afraid or because you think you don't deserve to win. You've earned the right to fight back. Whether you use it is up to you. After Catherine left, Marla sat with the folder until dawn. She read every document, every affidavit, every piece of evidence. It was damning, undeniable. Exactly what she needed to prove Eleanor had cheated. But using it would mean war, not the quiet sabotage they'd been fighting. Real, public, destructive war that would consume everything and everyone involved. When the sun rose, Marla was still sitting at the table. She heard Jacob coming down the stairs, heard him start the fire in the stove, heard him pause when he saw her. You been up all night? Couldn't sleep. He poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her. Saw the folder. Didn't ask about it, just waited. I have a choice to make, Marla said finally, and I don't know if I'm brave enough to make the right one. What's the choice? She told him everything. About Catherine's visit, about the evidence, about what using it would mean. Jacob listened without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Can I tell you something my father told me? He said eventually. Sure. He said that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about deciding what's worth being afraid for. Jacob sipped his coffee. You've been afraid your whole life, Marla. Afraid of taking up space, afraid of being noticed, afraid of wanting things you weren't supposed to want. And you did it anyway. Entered that competition, took this contract, built something real. That's courage. That was survival. No, survival is hiding. What you did was live. There's a difference. He gestured to the folder. This right here? This is you deciding whether you want to keep living or go back to just surviving. Nobody can make that choice for you. Marla looked at the folder again, then at the kitchen around her, the space she'd scrubbed and organized and filled with the smell of good food, the place that had become home in a way nowhere else ever had. She thought about her mother, who died apologizing for existing. She thought about Eleanor Pierce, sitting in her hotel room, confident that money and power would always win. She thought about every person who'd ever looked at her like she was taking up too much space simply by breathing, and she made her choice. 3 days later, Marla walked into the territorial governor's office with Rourke at her side and Catherine's folder under her arm. The meeting took 4 hours. Marla presented every piece of evidence, answered every question, watched the governor's expression shift from skeptical to shocked to grimly determined. When it was over, he promised a full investigation. Promised that if the evidence held up, there would be consequences. But he also warned that fighting powerful families was dangerous, that she should expect retaliation. that some battles couldn't be won, only survived. Marla thanked him and left. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within a week, Eleanor's lawyers filed defamation suits. The Pierce family issued public statements calling Marla a liar and a fraud. Pressure was applied to anyone who'd helped her. Catherine's restaurant saw a sudden drop in business. Suppliers who'd worked with Marla received threats. Even the newspaper that reported on the investigation faced advertiser boycotts. But something else happened too. People started talking, not just about the corruption allegations, but about why they mattered, about how the system was rigged to protect the wealthy, about how many talented people had been crushed by families like the Pierces. A dozen witnesses came forward with their own stories of Pierce family corruption. Business owners who'd been destroyed by manufactured legal troubles. Workers who'd been cheated out of wages. Small operators forced out of markets through intimidation and sabotage. The trickle of support became a flood. The territorial legislature launched a formal investigation. Judge Hendricks was suspended pending review. The property ruling was frozen until the legitimacy of the claim could be verified. Eleanor Pierce left the territory entirely, reportedly retreating to family holdings back east. But the 30-day eviction deadline was still approaching. And even with the investigation ongoing, Marla's legal right to remain at the trading post was uncertain. 2 weeks before the deadline, Benjamin Walsh called a crew meeting. Marla wasn't invited, but Jacob went and reported back what happened. Walsh had asked the crew a simple question. Did they want Marla to stay, or did they want the railroad to find a different food service provider? The vote was 40-0 in Marla's favor. Harris had abstained. The next day, he quit and left the crew. The railroad, faced with unanimous crew support and growing public attention to the case, issued a statement backing Marla's contract and offering legal assistance in fighting the eviction. 5 days before the deadline, the territorial governor announced his findings. The property claim was fraudulent. Judge Hendricks had accepted bribes. Multiple Pierce family business practices were under criminal investigation. The eviction notice was voided. Marla Vance could stay. The day the announcement came, Marla was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Jacob brought her the news, reading from the official telegram. She listened in silence. Then she set down her knife, walked outside, and sat on the porch steps. Rourke found her there 20 minutes later, staring at the mountains. "You won," he said. "I survived." "Same thing." "No." Marla turned to look at him. "Surviving is what I did before. This is different. This is—" She struggled for words. "This is being allowed to exist. Finally. After 28 years of being told I shouldn't. You were always allowed to exist. You just had to fight for people to admit it. That's a heavy burden." "Yes, but you carried it anyway." He sat down beside her. "And now you've got something you didn't have before." "What's that?" "Proof that fighting back works. That refusing to disappear matters. That sometimes, if you're stubborn enough and brave enough and refuse to quit, you can actually win." Marla thought about that. About everything she'd been through, the competition, the sabotage, the constant attacks, the final stand that could have destroyed her. About all the moments she'd wanted to quit and didn't. "I couldn't have done this alone," she said. "No, but you were the one who had to choose to do it at all." Rourke stood up. "The crew's planning something for dinner, some kind of celebration. Thought you should know." That evening, when the crew filed in for their meal, they didn't sit down immediately. Instead, Benjamin Walsh stepped forward, holding a wooden plaque that looked hastily carved but carefully done. "Miss Vance, the crew wanted you to have this, as thanks, and as recognition." He turned the plaque around. It read, "Marla Vance, best damn cook in the territory, proven fair and square." It was crude, misspelled territory, but it was also the most meaningful thing anyone had ever given her. Marla took the plaque, her throat too tight to speak. "We also took up a collection," Walsh continued. "Everyone contributed, even Harris before he left. Think his conscience got to him." He handed her a leather pouch. "Should be enough to make some improvements to the kitchen. Buy better equipment, whatever you need." Inside the pouch was more money than Marla had held at one time in her entire life. "I can't accept this," she managed to say. "You can and you will," one of the younger crew members called out. "You earned it. Someone else. You taught us that good food matters, that taking care of people matters." Another voice. You showed us that fairness isn't dead, that someone can fight the system and actually win. Benjamin Walsh smiled. We're just railroad workers, Miss Vance. We don't have power or influence, but we know what we saw. And we saw someone refuse to be broken. That's worth celebrating. The meal that followed was loud and joyful, full of laughter and stories, and the kind of camaraderie that comes from shared struggle and shared victory. Marla moved through it in a daze, accepting congratulations, listening to men tell her how much her cooking had meant to them, feeling something fundamental shift in her understanding of her own worth. After everyone had eaten and the kitchen was cleaned, Marla stood alone in the quiet space. The wooden plaque sat on the counter beside her. She ran her fingers over the carved letters, still not quite believing this was real. Jacob appeared in the doorway. You did good. We did good. All of us. No. You did the hardest part. You chose to fight back. The rest of us just followed your lead. He came into the room, looked around at the kitchen they'd built together. What are you going to do now? What do you mean? The contract's got 4 months left. After that, you're free to do whatever you want. Stay here, move on, start your own place. The world's more open to you now than it was 6 months ago. Marla hadn't thought that far ahead. Had been so focused on survival that she'd forgotten to plan for success. I don't know, she admitted. This place feels like home, but it's still Rourke's property, still his business, and She stopped, surprised by what she was about to say. I think I want something that's completely mine. No partners, no one I owe. Just me and my work. Then that's what you should build toward, Jacob smiled. You've got 4 months and a reputation now. Use them. Over the following weeks, Marla started planning. She saved every penny she could, adding it to the crew's gift. She researched property prices in different settlements. She designed her ideal kitchen on paper, calculating costs and requirements. But she also kept cooking, kept feeding the crew 3 meals a day, kept proving, again and again, that she deserved to be there. Catherine visited twice more, bringing news of the ongoing investigations. The Pierce family was unraveling under scrutiny. Business licenses revoked, contracts canceled, social standing crumbling. Eleanor had apparently married some East Coast businessman and was unlikely to ever return. You destroyed her, Catherine said during her second visit. No, she destroyed herself by cheating. I just made sure people knew about it. That's the same thing out here. Maybe. But I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I was tired of powerful people thinking they could crush anyone weaker without consequences. And now? Now I keep moving forward, because stopping means letting them win retroactively. The contract ended on a cold day in February. The crew was moving on to a new survey site, too far from the trading post for Marla's operation to be practical. She cooked them one final meal, a feast of everything she'd learned they loved. Roasted meat and fresh bread and vegetables and pie and coffee, strong enough to fuel another month of hard work. When they left, every single man stopped to thank her. Some shook her hand, others gave her awkward hugs. Benjamin Walsh was the last to leave. You changed something for us, he said. Showed us that the little guy can win sometimes. That fairness exists if you fight for it hard enough. I just cooked food. No, you did a lot more than that, and every man on this crew knows it. He tipped his hat. Take care of yourself, Miss Vance. I expect to hear about you doing great things. After they were gone, the trading post felt enormous and empty. Marla stood in the kitchen looking at the space that had been her battlefield and her sanctuary. Rourke found her there. Contracts fulfilled. Money's yours. Congratulations. Thank you. For everything. I didn't do anything you didn't earn yourself. He paused. I heard you're planning to move on. Start your own place. How did you? Jacob talks, and I pay attention. Rourke pulled out a folded document. I want to make you an offer. I'm not interested in another partnership. Not a partnership, a sale. I'm selling the trading post. Been thinking about it for a while now. Place has too many memories, and I'm getting too old to maintain it properly. Marla's heart started beating faster. Who's buying? You. If you want it. He held out the document. Price is fair market value. I'll hold the note myself. You can pay me back over 5 years, or you can use the contract money as down payment and get a bank loan for the rest. Why would you do that? Because you've already proven you can make this place work. Because I'd rather see it go to someone who'll treat it right than sell to some speculator who'll tear it down for lumber. He met her eyes. And because you deserve to have something that's completely yours. No partners, no one to answer to, just you and your work. The same words Jacob had used. Marla took the document with shaking hands, scanned the numbers. The price was more than fair. It was generous, almost suspiciously so. "This is below market value," she said. "It's what I think it's worth. You want to argue with me about the price being too low?" "I want to understand why," Rourke sighed. "Because my sister never got her chance, never got to own something, build something, be something more than what people decided she should be. And maybe if she'd had someone willing to give her a fair shot, her life would have turned out different." His voice roughened slightly. "I can't fix that, but I can make sure you get your shot." Marla looked at the document again, at the numbers that represented everything she'd ever wanted, a place of her own, a kitchen that answered to no one, the freedom to succeed or fail on her own terms. "I'll take it," she said. The paperwork took a week to finalize. Marla used the contract money as down payment and arranged a loan for the balance. The interest rate was reasonable, the terms manageable. Within 10 days of the crew's departure, Marla Vance became the owner of the trading post and all its property. She stood in the kitchen that first night as owner, running her hands along the counters she'd scrubbed, looking at the stove she'd learned to manage, feeling the weight and freedom of ownership settle over her. This was hers. Not borrowed. Not conditional. Hers. Jacob knocked on the doorframe. "How's it feel?" "Terrifying." "That's how you know it's real." He came into the room. "What are you going to do with it?" "First, rest. Actually rest for the first time in 6 months." Marla smiled. "After that, open it up properly, not just a contract kitchen, a real restaurant, where people can come for good food without needing a railroad job to justify it. That'll mean dealing with travelers, traders, locals, all kinds of people." "Good. I'm done hiding in the back kitchen. If I'm going to do this, I'm doing it all the way." Over the next months, Marla transformed the trading post. She expanded the dining area, improved the kitchen, established reliable supply lines with the network of small farmers and hunters she'd built relationships with. She hired help. Thomas stayed on, and she brought in 2 local women who needed work and learned quickly. Word spread. Travelers started routing their journeys to include a stop at Marla's place. Traders made deals at her tables. Locals celebrated special occasions with meals that made them remember why good food mattered. Catherine visited regularly, always bringing news from the wider territory. The investigations into Pierce family corruption had resulted in several convictions. Judge Hendricks was permanently barred from the bench. New regulations about land claims and business practices were being written to prevent similar abuses. "You started something," Catherine said during one visit. "Not just for yourself, for everyone who comes after you." "I just wanted to cook. That's how all revolutions start. Someone just wanting to do their work without being crushed for it." Catherine smiled. "By the way, I've been approached by several young women asking how they can follow your example, start their own businesses, fight back against systems designed to keep them small." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That it's hard and scary, and you might lose everything, but that some things are worth the risk, and that seeing someone like you succeed makes the risk feel less impossible." A year after taking ownership, Marla stood on the porch watching the sun set over the valley. The trading post was thriving. Her loan payments were on schedule. She'd even started saving again, building toward future expansions. But more than that, she'd built something that couldn't be taken away. Not a building or a business. Those were always vulnerable. She'd built proof that she deserved to exist, that her work mattered, that refusing to disappear wasn't just stubbornness, it was power. Rourke rode up as the last light was fading. He dismounted and joined her on the porch. "Heard you're fully booked through next month," he said. "Word gets around." "Good word. People saying this is the best food between Denver and Salt Lake." "People exaggerate." "Sometimes. Not this time." He was quiet for a moment. "You did it, Marla. Everything you set out to do. Everything they said was impossible. We did it. You, Jacob, Catherine, all the people who helped along the way." "No, we helped. But you're the one who refused to quit when quitting made sense. That was you." Marla thought about that. about all the moments she could have walked away, should have walked away if measured by conventional wisdom, about how many times fear had almost won. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Sure. I'm still scared every day. Scared this will all fall apart. Scared I'm not good enough. Scared that someone will find a way to take it away." "That's normal." "I know, but I'm also—" She struggled for words. "I'm also not apologizing anymore for taking up space, for wanting things, for being visible. And that's new, that's different, and I think maybe that's the real victory. Not keeping the business, just existing without apology." Rourke nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud." "I don't know about that. She wanted me to be safe. And safe meant invisible. Safe meant surviving. You chose living instead. Big difference." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars started emerging. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The sound was lonely and fierce and free. Marla thought about everything that had brought her here. The competition where she'd first refused to disappear. The partnership that had given her a foothold. The battles that had nearly destroyed her but had instead forced her to discover how strong she actually was. She thought about Eleanor Pierce, who'd had every advantage and had still lost because she'd mistaken cruelty for strength. She thought about all the women who'd come before her, who'd been crushed by systems designed to keep them small, whose talents had died with them unrecognized. And she thought about the young women Catherine had mentioned, looking at Marla's success and seeing possibility instead of impossibility. "You know what the hardest part is?" Marla said eventually. "What's that?" "Accepting that I deserve this, that I earned it, that it's not luck or charity or some mistake that'll be corrected." She looked at Rourke. "I spent so long being told I was worthless that even now, with proof otherwise, part of me still believes it. That voice ever going to go away? Probably not, but I'm learning to talk back to it, to tell it that wrong doesn't become right just because it's repeated often enough. That's all any of us can do. Keep talking back. Keep refusing to accept other people's limitations." Rourke stood up. "I should head out. Early day tomorrow." "Rourke?" Marla stopped him. "Thank you. For seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. I didn't see anything that wasn't already there. I just gave you space to show it." He tipped his hat. "Take care of yourself, Marla, and keep refusing to disappear." After he left, Marla stayed on the porch until the cold drove her inside. She walked through the her trading post, checking doors, banking fires, preparing for tomorrow. In the kitchen, she paused to look at the wooden plaque from the crew. It hung on the wall now, crooked and misspelled and perfect. "Best damn cook in the territory, proven fair and square." She'd been called worse things. Been reduced to her size, her gender, her poverty, been dismissed and degraded and told she didn't belong. But she'd also been called capable, talented, brave, and most importantly, she'd proven, to herself more than anyone, that survival wasn't the same as living, that refusing to disappear mattered, that sometimes if you were stubborn enough and desperate enough and brave enough, you could carve out space for yourself in a world determined to deny you existed. The fire in the stove was burning low but steady. Marla added wood, watching the flames catch and spread. Tomorrow she'd wake before dawn and start cooking again. Would serve travelers and traders and anyone else who walked through her door. Would build on what she'd created, one meal at a time. Because that's what endurance looked like. Not dramatic gestures or grand victories, just showing up, day after day, refusing to quit, refusing to shrink, refusing to accept that the world's limitations were her limitations. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. The mountains stood dark against the starlit sky, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but it was also honest. It didn't care about your background or your body or what people said you deserved. It only cared about what you could do, what you could build, what you could survive. And Marla Vance had proven she could survive anything. More than that, she'd proven she could thrive. She closed the stove door and turned down the lamps, leaving just enough light to find her way upstairs. In her room, she undressed and climbed into bed, her body aching from the day's work in the good way that meant she'd earned her rest. Sleep came easier now than it had in years. The anxiety that had plagued her was still there, probably always would be, but it no longer controlled her. She'd learned that fear was just another obstacle to work through, not a reason to stop trying. As she drifted off, Marla thought about what she'd tell her younger self if she could go back. What wisdom she'd offer to that scared girl scrubbing potatoes behind Sullivan's boarding house, convinced her life would never be more than other people's kitchens and other people's rules. She'd tell her that size didn't determine worth, that being visible was terrifying but necessary, that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to apologize for existing. She'd tell her that the people who said she couldn't succeed were wrong. Not because success was guaranteed, it never was, but because trying mattered more than the outcome, because fighting back mattered more than winning, because living out loud mattered more than surviving in silence. Most of all, she'd tell her that she was enough, exactly as she was, that her worth didn't need to be earned or proven or justified, that she had always deserved to take up space, to want things, to exist without apology. But maybe her younger self wouldn't have believed those words. Maybe they only made sense after living through everything that made them true. Maybe some lessons could only be learned by walking through fire and coming out scarred but standing. The last thought Marla had before sleep claimed her completely was simple and certain. Tomorrow she'd wake up and do it all again. And the day after that. And every day after, for as long as she had breath in her body. Because that's what it meant to refuse to disappear. Not a single moment of defiance, but a lifetime of showing up, of existing, of mattering, of being undeniably, unapologetically, completely herself. And in the end, that was the only victory that really counted.